Good morning, everybody. So it's been a while. It's been about 6 months since we did the last one of these. But today it's a Q&A stream. I'm going to spend about 3.5 hours answering questions. And then I have a real life announcement and then a couple more questions and then we'll call it a day. But this is a rare opportunity where I'm not playing TFT. I'm just focused on answering questions. And so since I'll be focused on answering questions, hopefully you'll get more in-depth responses, maybe less snark. So, yeah. Yo, Nick Pat, congrats on Golden Squink, by the way. Except for your face, nice. Okay, so let's get started. First question, definitely a comedy question, but we'll just jump right in. Is Chonk Poggle's father? This is the question my mods put at the top of the list, by the way. Yeah. The answer is no. Chonk is not Poggle's father. They might be from, similar areas of like the Dragonlands and stuff like that, but no. Not the father. You are not the father. Okay. Cool. And then I press this and we get a new question. Sweet. Okay. Are you happy with the TFT performance over the past years and seasons? So the answer to this question has to be yes, right? We're a game that's 5 years old now. We're a game that's been wildly successful, very profitable for Riot. Everyone's been able to work. We've been able to do a lot of cool things. 11 sets in, plus a bunch of mid sets. Now, that being said, am I like, everything was perfect? No, of course not, right? I think we can look back over, the last 5 years and point to all the various, oops, wish I didn't do that. Oops, shadow items. Oops, balance things here. Team members moving on. A lot of the things that happen behind the scenes, people don't realize, right? How many people are still on the TFT team from the first year? People come and go and things like that, so you're always having to adjust, but you gain new people. You gain, new people working on TFT, new blood, new bonds, new friendships, stuff like that. So, it's been good. It's been good. Definitely not going to say it's all easy, but overall, again, who wouldn't want to work on a game like TFT that has been this popular for so long? So, overall, yeah, pretty darn happy with TFT's performance over the past years and seasons. Now, one of the dangerous things is, you always find that the corporate line must keep going up, and I have to keep reminding them most video games line go down. So, let's just be happy with what we've done and keep doing well. But you never know. So, yeah, overall pretty happy. All right, this is a long one. Whew, it fits. Okay. Coming from Yu-Gi-Oh!, that community really values being able to interact with what the opponent is doing, and it struck me that TFT is very centered on the individual. Have you considered adding more ways to interact with other players as a potential set mechanic, or is increasing player interaction not part of the vision for TFT? So, this one's interesting because when you think about what TFT is as a genre, it's almost like a hero battler, right? Where you're building your team, excuse me, where you're building your team and trying to make the coolest team you can and build that up. It's almost like an RPG in a sense, except condensed down to 40 minutes. So, you're trying to build your team and you have this vision of cool, I want to build this. This is what I'm going for. I think generally as you're building that team, if someone was able to come along and star down your unit or steal this item or whatever, it feels pretty bad to have that interaction happen. And that's generally what we're talking about, because in a PvP game, you're not going to give them positive interactions, you're going to give them negative interactions. So generally we haven't seen that go over very well. And the few things we have added, this is things like Zephyr and Shroud and, stuff like that, even Spite now, generally haven't landed well. Generally people find them not very fun. Even to a lesser extent, right? Like Assassins sort of going, hey, that thing you worked really hard to build? nah, JK, it's dead. So that overall ends up being pretty negative. So overall, I think you're right that TFT is going to stay a game where you're sort of focused on building your team, your Rube Goldberg machine, your army, and then having that fight somebody else's army, and that's generally feels pretty good. So can I see you? Yes, I can see you. I can see the chat, but I am focused on answering questions. So, but yeah, so overall, we've definitely considered it, but overall, I'm pretty negative on the idea. So, yeah. Okay. Do you think items locking onto champions is an important part of gameplay and strategy? The Malphite encounter is one of my favorites, and it feels like it opens lines and lets me experiment more, but I get that it makes the game easier. Now that TFT has added many other decisions and complexities since set 1, maybe it's time to revisit the item locking choice. So I generally actually kind of agree with this. It's a pretty interesting thing. We've started to test how this feels. Right, we've tried the Malphite encounter. We've tried Golden Remover as an augment. If you look at Golden Remover on Pengu's Party, that's there all the time. So this is the kind of thing that, like, yeah, it's one of those things we should challenge our assumptions from set 1. Now, there's pretty clear pros and cons. Being able to move items around, yeah, feels pretty good. Lowers the cost of having to lock down an item. But when optimized, it gets pretty out of control, right? Like moving around items constantly, moving around components. We'd also have to deal with things like Shroud and Zephyr, Thieves' Gloves, things like that. So this is one of those ones, though, that we are kind of starting to look at a little bit and see if there's something to do here. That being said, I mean, what I would say is definitely play Pengu's Party a lot and see how that feels with the Golden Remover. Let us know what you think. Because when you really start to optimize it, it gets pretty crazy. But yeah, we actually are looking into this pretty heavily, and I agree. Pros and cons. So, and the other interesting thing is, like, there might be some middle ground as well that might have a really cool solve here, and I think that's where there might be some really cool potential as well. So, cool. Do you think there is a limit on how many sets can be made with League characters before things start to feel dull? I know there are ways to stretch things out, make champions feel fresh, add League-adjacent characters, etc. But I'm just curious if you and the team have thought about it and what it might mean for TFT. So, the good news is, the answer is, like, is there a limit? Yeah, probably. There's probably comes a point somewhere around set 50, set 60, where it's like, okay, we've been doing how many different variations of Yasuo can you really do when you hit your 50th variation of Yasuo? There might be some limit someday, somewhere. But the good news is, I don't think that limit is really realistically nearby. We're 5 years in now. We're on our 11th, 12th set, things like that. And overall, I think we're still doing some pretty cool stuff. I look at the next, 4 or 5 sets we've got planned out, and I'm like, no, we're still doing some pretty creative stuff here, pretty interesting things. So I'm not worried in the 5 or 10 year span. And that alone is already like, okay, cool. So we made a video game that lasts 10 years. That's a win. But do I think there's a limit someday? Yeah, eventually. Eventually you run out of themes and stuff like that you've done before, and you can only remix, base Runeterra so many times and stuff like that. So maybe someday, but who knows? Maybe set 49 will be the 58 Ezreals, and we'll see how that set feels. And who knows? Maybe we'll start really pushing the limit. The comparable here has always been Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering's been around for 30, 40 years at this point, 30 years. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get there someday, but it's definitely going to get harder as time goes on. That's true. Cool. Again, just trying to get through a lot of these. So, does the team prioritize giving each unit a chance to shine during a set? For example, Riven felt really weak in the early set, so it seemed like the team went further in buffing her to make her playable. So, the answer is yes and no. It's not there's not a goal of like, okay, this champ hasn't had a chance to shine, so buff them and nerf the other ones. That's not the goal. But what is the goal? And this is like, people always ask, there's another question coming up I'm going to skip because it's similar, that says, how do you know if balance is in a good place in a set? The goal of any set in TFT, the goal that we would call like perfect balance, we nailed it, is you take a look at every champion in the set, and every non-tank, you can look at them and go, okay, I'm going to make you the carry, and if I can do that and have a comp that succeeds, we did it, right? So if you start looking through the set, here, I'm going to open up the set 11 champions here. And it's like, okay, if you can pick, Caitlyn and make a comp around Caitlyn, good job. If you can make a comp around Ahri, good job, right? If you can make a comp around Sivir, good job. And like, that's the goal, is that every single carry, you can make a comp around and win. Now, that is difficult because that line gets really, really thin. So, for example, like, I think right now if we buffed Ahri, if we just straight up buffed Ahri right now, people would be like, you're out of your mind. Syndra's really good. Your Fated's good. Why are you buffing Ahri, right? And so one of the more complicated parts about balance is that power distribution, right? Because if we want an Ahri reroll comp to be playable, we can't just buff Ahri right now because that buffs Syndra comps. So we might have to nerf a Syndra comp a little bit to make room for that Ahri power. And so that's one of the more complex parts about balance. But again, the goal here is every single carry can be a playable, win condition. Now again, using set 11 as the example, did we hit that? Not really. I think a lot of the one costs we talked about, like Ahri, Caitlyn, even Darius is kind of like struggling. So a lot of the one costs struggle. In the two cost space, you mentioned Riven, Aatrox, laughable. Like Aatrox never really panned out as a carry. But we started to see other ones like Kiana do well, for example, or, Senna was doing well for a while. So someone in chat says Jax Sag. Well, again, it's non-tanks. Tanks are just tanks, right? Like I don't care that there's no Alawi carry comp. That's not the goal. But non-tanks, everyone should try to feel good. And so if you look at any set, that's the thing like you should call us out on. You're like, hey, I tried to make Soraka reroll work and it's not working. It's impossible to make Soraka reroll work. Then we should buff Soraka. And again, that buff of Soraka might need to come with a nerf to Wukong or Heavenly or something like that. And that's the challenging part of balance, is because again, the whole package might be correct, but the power distribution within them is not. So that's the goal. So yeah. Hey Mort, I've heard other devs claim that players know when something is wrong with a game, but often voice that concern poorly. Do you ever find yourself in a similar situation with TFT where players complain about something for the wrong reason, but you still ended up changing it? Yes. So first off, generally when players are playing a video game and something is wrong, they will have an emotional response and say it's wrong, right? And we see this all the time, right? Like I lost to a Syndra comp, and I don't know why I'm picking on Syndra today, but I lost to a Syndra comp today. Syndra is OP, game is bad, I hate game, right? Like that is an emotional response to not winning. It is what it is. And so often they voice that concern poorly. Yeah, sure, because again, in the heat of the moment, players' first reaction isn't to logically go, okay, well, now that I lost, let me analyze the board and see the stat distribution of this champions and see if that feels correct. And, oh, nope, actually, it was Ornn that had too much. Like, no, that's not how players react. That's unrealistic, and there's no world where we would expect players to react like that. That's just not a thing. Our job is to go, okay, cool. Oh, and the other thing here is, there might be other factors, right? Like, let's say that player did lose to Syndra. It might have been their fault, right? Like, maybe their front line was bad. Maybe their positioning was bad. Maybe they, wrong side 50-50'd. So even if they lost, it might not actually be a problem, right? Like, they might just say, hey, this is not good. But our job as, game designers and things like that is... My mic's a little rough. What's wrong with my mic? But our job as game designers is to weed through that player feeling, right? Because when players are playing a game, they're experiencing it. And our job is to go, okay, cool. Is this actually an issue? Is this a thing that we need to change? Is there a way to make players overall have a better experience? So I can turn it down a little. There. See if that helps. Try to make a better experience for those players and sort of dig through those emotional responses until we find, the way to get the game to be in a better state. But again, that's the thing. Like, I think if anybody has watched my stream before, we get players coming in and they'll complain about the weirdest things, right? That aren't actually good, or just, again, they lose about things. So overall, it's just about digging through all of that feedback, finding the things that are an issue, because again, some things really are issues. There are definitely times where players are like, yeah, this is an issue. And you're like, yeah, you're right. And we need to fix that. So, yeah. And I think one of the worst things is when someone comes in and is like, well, the customer's always right. And it's like, no, they're not. The customer's not always right. So, and anyone who says that, that's a bad thing. So, okay. Hey Mort, my question is about vertical traits and 5 costs. In set 10, a lot of the vertical comps didn't have 5 costs directly integrated, and someone could roll on 8 and hit a pretty stable board even if no 5 cost was found. In this set, Storyweaver, Fated, and Umbral, all of them need an early 5 cost to spike. What was the intention behind this change? So the answer to this is actually variety. It's not an inherent, like, one is better than the other. But here's generally the way to look at it. Let's pretend you make a vertical comp, right? A 6-piece composition. We'll call it Raptor. That's our trait. Our trait's called Raptor. And in this trait, you are allowed to give it a general power budget. And I'm going to approximate that power budget as, let's say, plus 50% output, okay? The harder it is to hit this trait and the harder it is to activate that trait, the more powerful you can make it. So for example, let's say this 6-piece trait was 2 1 costs, 2 2 costs, and 2 3 costs. That's very easy to hit. That's going to be active at level 6, sometimes level 5 with an emblem. So that trait's not going to be very powerful. We're just going to have to lower that trait's power. Now let's say that exact same trait is a 1 cost, 2 3 costs, 2 4 costs, and a 5 cost. That'd be really bad trait design, but that's a trait that's like super hard to onboard onto because you have to have the 1 cost and the 3 cost. Then you can't even spike it till you find those 4 costs. And then you have to find the 5 cost. That trait's not coming online for a while. So that trait actually ends up getting to be more powerful. So like that trait might get to be 70% output, 80% output. And again, I'm abstracting this. But generally that's what you have to do is you have to take how difficult is it to turn on, and that's the power distribution within it. So by attaching 5 costs to it, you generally are like, cool, we want this trait to be a little harder to hit, and we can put some power into it, which is a good thing. And so neither is necessarily wrong. You're allowed to design traits that can be, 1 1 2 2 3 4. You're allowed to design traits that are 1 2 3 4 4 5. It's just a matter of making sure that you balance their stat distribution to make sure that matches the difficulty of turning that on. And so in this set, they wanted those 5 costs to be connected because they thematically fit. So they make sure the power is there. Certainly 7 Storyweaver is a big spike. 7 Fated, and then, 6 Umbral seems like a decent spike. So, plus there's the augments, but overall that's kind of our approach. And again, neither is necessarily right or wrong. It's just, that's, what we do to try to make sure it ends up feeling better. So, all right. I already answered this one. How do you know if balance is in a good place in a set? We talked about that. Here's the next one. Paste and save. Cool. Okay, how do you make and choose cool 5 costs? So this is a hard one. Because this is pretty abstract, but generally when we're making a set, you pick the theme, right? So I'm going to use set 10 or I'll use Remix Rumble as the example. First thing you do is you pick a theme, and let's say we're going to do true damage. Okay, you pick your verticals. We've got true damage. You look at your champions, and so you look at the true damage lineup, and you're like, which one do I think has a cool spell idea that we can do for a 5 cost? And so let's pretend we're going to change Remix Rumble for a second. I'm looking at like Yasuo and Senna and who else? The Echo, Kiana. I forget who the other ones are. But you look at those and you're like, which one do I have an interesting idea to make a 5 cost? Akali, thank you. And so let's say we were like Senna, although we've already done this, so I'm cheating. You then pull Senna aside and you're like, cool, as a designer, I need to make a 5 cost Senna that is true damage. And so the first thing you're going to do is like, well, what does her trait do? Okay, well, it ups her damage. That's pretty cool. So she'll definitely want to be a carry. You'll probably pick the itemization you want this champion to use. Because, for example, you've already got Akali in the trait, and she's the AD champion, so you want Senna to be AP this set. Okay, so Senna's items are going to be a Shojin Archangel's kind of build. Okay, cool. So she's an AP user. So now it's like, what can you do to make her cool? Now, the obvious answer is just like, shoot spell, do damage. Okay, that's basic. But now you're looking for a creative twist on what you can do with true damage. And so you start thinking about like neat little mechanical hooks or neat little thematic things. And again, I'm making this up off the fly, so these aren't going to be the best ideas, but like, imagine if you did something like, I'm going to have this Senna where it's like a record stacking. And so every time she does true damage, she gains a record stack. And at 10 record stacks, she like, instead of her spell, she throws a bunch of records. Okay, cool. And you can start to challenge that mechanical hook. And so, you know, that might be an interesting idea. You brainstorm a bunch of those, figure out the one that makes sense, and go from there. And generally, it's a balance of trying to make sure that it's going to make sense in TFT, but it's also creative and pushes the bounds a little bit. And that's part of the fun part of the job, is just like being creative and thinking about some weird stuff, you know? And so some of the more creative people on our team can really think outside the bounds, and they're like, you know, maybe Senna puts down a DJ station and does something like, I don't know, you know? And so like you can do some cool stuff there, but that's generally the approach. And then once you have it, you implement it, you test it, make sure it works, and go from there. So, yeah. The next one is, how does the team come up with unique abilities, 5 costs, Twisted Fate, for champions that are older or have simpler... Oh, okay, I guess that is different enough. I can do the simpler version here. How does the team come up with unique abilities? We talked about 5 costs already, so I'll skip that. But Twisted Fate from set 8.5, etc., for champions that are older or have simpler kits. So generally what's interesting about this is the first thing you can do to start getting some inspiration is actually go into the files. We have all the animation files from League of Legends and TFT in the past. And you can start sort of thinking through, like, what could I put together? What could I string together to do interesting things here? Because it is definitely a problem, right? Like, one of the reasons why you've never seen Malzahar the 5 cost is because, like, he doesn't really have a lot going on in his kit. But just like the 5 cost, it's the same kind of thing where it's like, what can you string together? And so, for example, with Twisted Fate, the designer who was working on it was like, well, he's got his auto attack, and his auto attack, you know, throws those cards. So what if I take that auto attack animation and like play it 10 times? What does that look like? You know, kind of got that Gambit card throwing thing going on. And like, that's cool. I can make a spell off that. And like, the first version of the spell, by the way, of that Twisted Fate was actually just 10 cards straight at the first target. And then what happens is someone who's a more mechanical designer, like someone on our finalization pod, might look at that and go, okay, but the problem with that Twisted Fate is that if he hits a target that's going to die, there'll be a lot of wasted damage. It'll end up being single target. You don't want a high single target spell. So then you iterate, right? And so with Twisted Fate, it was like, well, what if every third card like went to a nearby target? So like most of the damage is on the first target, but you might hit some other people nearby. So it feels like a little more AoE spell. Cool. And so, you know, you kind of iterate from there, but generally it's like looking at our champions and our animations and trying to push that bounds a little bit. So yeah, and you can kind of piece those together. It's like, take a champ like Ahri, and it's like, well, what are all the things Ahri can do? piece them together, that's a new skill. And sometimes we even will pull animations from other things. Or actually, my favorite example, and props to Giovanni for this one, was when we took Jinx and took her recall animation. So like that was one where it was like, okay, I'm going to take this recall animation and turn that into a spell. Because Jinx had the recall and she'd hop on the rocket, come down and land. And like, that was neat. So that helps too. And like taking Jinx, who's just a boring auto attacker, into a big AoE nuke, cool. So that's kind of our approach. Okay, how does your team deal with a new set not being received as positively by the community as the previous set? So this one's tricky because I think there's a difference on like how received it actually is. Because one of the things we've trained people to not fall victim to is like the immediate hyperbole of the vocal minority, right? Like there's definitely going to be people when we released, Remix Rumble, who were like, this set's bad, right? And they just immediately like, better go on Twitter, better go on Reddit, say this set's bad, balance bad, everything bad. And so we have to be careful not to fall victim to that. One of the things that helps is we have an insights team that will actually like properly figure out how the set is being received. And not just, that's the other thing, by the way, too, is that because we live in North America, oftentimes the sources of information we're getting are North American biased. And we have to make sure we are a global game. So like, what does Korea think about it? What does Brazil think about it? What does China think about it? What is, every different region is going to respond differently. So we have to make sure we have a good understanding of how the world receives the set. That's important so that we don't just get like biased to what North America thinks. So the first thing is just like, not overreact and wait to see how the insights report goes, see how everything lands. Is it actually bad or good or whatever? And usually it's nowhere near as bad as Twitter or Reddit would have you believe, but there are exceptions. I want to talk about one very clear exception here, which was set 5. Set 5, like we had just come off set 4. Set 4 was crushing it. Set 4 was doing amazing. And then set 4.5 was doing amazing. Everything was good. Graphs going up. The crazy thing about 4.5 was even near the end of the set, graph was going up, which is unheard of in TFT terms. It was like people are still playing the set 6 months in. It's wild, which is great. And then set 5 came out. Now set 5, there was no hyperbole. Set 5 was not received as positively by the community as a previous set. It was not received well. And so, in that particular case, oftentimes what happens immediately is, cool, let's figure out what went wrong. Let's figure out what the problem is. And then, is there something we can do very quickly to fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again? Right? So, for example, with set 5, we took a really big bet where we're like, look, this set mechanic is causing a lot of problems. We probably can't fix all the champs and traits that are causing problems, but we can try to balance those at least. So you'd see like live iterations on things like Forgotten and stuff like that. But we can take a big bet and like, we deleted shadow items because shadow items were pretty universally hated. And I know someone in chat's going to be like, what? I loved shadow items. It turns out on the internet, you can find someone who likes everything. But when we talk about shadow items not being liked, it was like 92% of players do not like this thing, So we took a big bet. We deleted shadow items. And then, we made a big thing of like, okay, Kiss Curse? Not so much. Now, a more gray example here is actually like dragons. Dragons was a much grayer example here, right? Because like shadow items, universally bad. Fix it, no problem. Dragons were right on the line. Dragons were like, there were players who loved it, and there were players who hated it, right? And so dragons is the kind of thing you have to really dig deep, and it's like, okay, well, what's going right about dragons? What's going wrong about dragons? What do we want to learn from it? What do we take away? And that's the nice thing about TFT is because we're a sets model, all we have to do is sort of go, okay, we can just push this aside for now, learn from it, and think about it more. So, with the case of dragons, it's like, cool, We know some players don't like parts about dragons, so let's take a break from dragons. Let's go back and see what people loved about dragons, right? And it's like generally a big central unit that's very strong and exciting. Pretty cool. Dragons are just thematically a really cool thing. Great. And like then we can take those learnings and apply them to a future set and go, these were the good things. Let's take that and move that forward. And that's, again, one of the cool parts about working on TFT is you can always improve the game by taking those learnings. And it's one of the things I love about it as a designer. It's like you're always learning what could be better, what could be better, what could be better. So yeah, so TLDR, we learn from things, we react to them, and we try to improve the next set. That's the TLDR of that question. Cool. And chat, I know because I'm answering questions, I'm not really reacting to chat as much. I am kind of like glancing over and reading it, but I can't do 6 things at once. So hopefully you're finding this entertaining though. I'm interested in the identity of TFT champions within a set. I remember LeBlanc having a very clear identity as the AP assassin within set 8.5. How do you avoid having TFT champions sharing or overlapping identities? I feel like Janna's ranged shielding identity is very unique and clear, whereas Amumu and Nico's do almost the same thing. Is it hard to create unique roles with only so many identities that can even exist in TFT? So the answer is yes and no. I think part of it is like we have the pleasure of getting to work off of League of Legends. And so a lot of those champions have pretty unique identities, right? Like you can name a League of Legends champions. What does Blitzcrank do? Well, he's a beefy dude who grabs people and kills them. Okay, cool. We've got that identity. What does Vayne do? Tumble and true damage. Great. Got that identity, right? And like League of Legends generally is pretty good about making sure that champion identities are unique. We can latch onto that and do our own things with that, right? Caitlyn's a sniper from long range. Great. Can latch onto that. And so generally it's not too hard to adjust, but the one exception here is tanks. One of the things some of our more creative people on the team struggle with is like they want to make a bunch of cool, unique traits, and it's like cool, unique tanks. And what do tanks do? They live. It's a tank's job to be alive. Well, how do they stay alive? Well, they heal, they shield, they CC. That's about it. They do those things. How many different ways? Like, so this person listed Amumu and Nico. Well, what do they both do? They heal and they stay alive. Like, it's kind of what they do. So until someone invents a new tanking paradigm, tanks will end up feeling kind of similar. It's just kind of the truth. But that's really kind of what their job is. Their job is to live. Now, that's not to say we haven't had some cool ones, right? Olaf from Remix Rumble, you know, he was a tank, but like, what did he do? He just kind of attacked really fast, and it felt interesting. So, yeah. So there are things there, but overall, like I said, the fact that we use League of Legends generally puts us in a pretty good spot. Someone mentioned drain tanks or resistance tanks. So we have resistance tanks. Jax on live right now, for example, is gain a bunch of resistances. Generally, those are just like less satisfying versions of shielding and healing. So they exist, but they're there. And then drain tanks. So we've done drain tanks. The problem with drain tanks is drain tanks they exist on a threshold. And here's how drain tanks work. Can I heal more than the damage they're dealing? If yes, you never kill me. If no, I die in 10 seconds and the game's over. Like, both of those outcomes kind of suck for the game. Both of those outcomes kind of suck. Every time Vlad or Swain are the two we've done a lot, and every time Vlad or Swain end up being OP, the game is miserable. Miserable. So, drain tanks are tough. But even then, what are drain tanks doing? They're healing. We already talked about healing. Like, they're not even that different either. So, yeah. Just build anti-heal. Yeah, perfect. Okay, this question's highlighted for some reason. Let's see what this question says. It's really long, too. It doesn't even fit on my notepad. Okay. It seems like there is a disconnect between streamers and the average player base. Average players seem to enjoy the randomness and fun elements of the game, such as portals and encounters. Streamers seem to dislike these mechanics since they claim they are antithetical to their competitive playstyle. This disconnect seems to create a world where it's almost not fun to listen to high-level content creators because they complain about mechanics that are generally fun for the rest of the community. Do you think this is an accurate assessment of the state of the community? And if it is, how do you think TFT will adapt to deal with the community split between players who want to have fun and more competitive content creators? Okay, this is a really interesting question, a really spicy question. First off, it seems like there is a disconnect between streamers and the average player base. Yes and no. Obviously, vocally, yes. They're going to say like, oh, I hate Scuttle Puddle. I hate prismatic augments. Rawr, I'm a streamer. I'm so mad. I just want gold. Like, sure, that's what they say on their stream. Do you know how full of shit they are? We have checked on every access. We have watched their streams. We have looked at, you know what they actually love? Scuttle Puddle and prismatic augments. And like, stop. Like, it's actually kind of embarrassing how full of crap they are. Because, they kind of just say one thing and then play the game and have fun. So, I don't know. There's definitely a disconnect in what they say and what they do. So, but to be clear, the other thing we have to be careful of here is that we're not generalizing all streamers, right? Because every streamer does have a different opinion. And I'm going to pick on like someone like Milk, for example. Milk has a very, very different opinion of like how the game should be played and what's fun to him. And it's very clear. Like, and what Milk finds fun is very different than what someone like Robin Songs finds fun, which is very different than when someone like Raditz finds fun, which is very different than what someone like, Solo Gasong finds fun. They each have their own opinions. And so trying to generalize them as like one category is also probably disingenuous and troublesome. So you want to be careful of that, right? So even there, it's good to not overgeneralize, and it's good to think about this. Now, let's keep going and break down this question a little more. Average players seem to enjoy randomness and fun elements of the game, such as portals and encounters. Streamers seem to dislike these mechanics, etc. So rather than bucket it as like streamers versus advanced players, what's interesting is if you actually bucket all of our players, like it has very little to do with like streamer or not. There are buckets of players, right? There's a bucket of players of various elos that like the variance and variety and the high rolls. For example, some of China's most competitive high elo players will yell at you that there's not enough 3-star 5 costs in the game and they want more of that, right? So like that's a group of players that love the variance. And then over here, there's a group of players, various elos, they could be platinum, they could be challenger, doesn't matter, who are like, no, I just want to hone TFT and I hate when anything unpredictable comes my way. Get this crap out of the game. They exist also, right? Like both of these audiences exist, and they're both not like a super narrow group like streamers. They actually have a pretty wide variety of player types within each of them. And it's important to remember that if you're going to empathize with your audience. Now, what TFT has done is we've tried to find sort of the balance between them. It's like, we clearly want variance in our game so that you can play for 500 games or 1,000 games a set and still have fun. That's going to be very important to the set. Atrox, appreciate the golden spank, by the way. But we also want to make sure that the game isn't generally decided by BS, right? Just like, oh, this random thing happened and now I lose. Now, where that line is going to be blurry and different per player, right? Some players look at something like the Recombobulator augment and they go, that's BS and shouldn't exist. Okay, I hear you, but tough. And other people will be like, hey, this encounter that like, I don't know, what was one of the, that gives everyone free rerolls for 2 turns or whatever. That's too BS. And it's like, yeah, that one kind of is, so there's definitely a line and we have to find that line. Now, continuing on with the question, this disconnect seems to create a world where it's almost not fun to listen to high-level content creators because they complain about mechanics that are generally fun for the rest of the community. So, okay, this one's interesting too because as a streamer, what I can tell you is there is definitely a group of players that like watching people complain. I think you can call them hate watchers, you can call them whatever you want, but there's a reason Soju is the most popular streamer. It's because it's fun to watch. He is fun to watch. It is fun to watch him sink into his chair and lose his mind at the insanity that goes on in TFT. That's fun. And so But some people might not like that, and that's okay. And one of the best things about streaming is that there are different content creators. I, for example, really enjoy Froden's stream and watching him. Some people might not like that nerdy, over-educational, over-competitive stuff, so they might go to someone like Spicy Appies, or they might watch Robin. Everyone's got their different tastes, and I love that there's a bunch of different creators out there. So, yeah. So someone said, do you think this is an accurate assessment of the state of the community? Well, not quite. That's why I tried to explain all the other stuff. And do you think TFT will adapt to deal with a community split between players who have... No. So if I've learned anything about streamers and players or whatever, is most players, and this is going to sound harsher than I mean it to, but most players, they like what they like and they only care what they like, and everyone else is wrong. I was watching it's funny because fighting games have been yelling at each other recently about which fighting game is dead and which fighting game has more players. And they keep showing their bar graphs to each other. And it's like, well, your game only has 3,000 players on Steam, and our game has 10,000 players on Steam and a bigger prize pool. Oh, yeah? Well, your casual players don't matter. Who cares about casual? It just, everyone wants to argue to say that they're right. And like, TFT isn't going to solve that problem. People are going to be people. So the thing I just think we're going to be focused on is we're going to make the game fun, and we're just going to keep doing that. So, yeah. Ad break? I know. I'm just going to keep powering through, though. Something, ad, something, prime, something. I don't know. Okay. What are you and the team doing to combat balance thrashing? I know some players love that the game changes greatly every 2 weeks, but this set felt quite rough in the early few patches. Between bucket changes, 4-cost buffs, and all the new items, it felt like I was unable to continuously keep up with everything. I consume a lot of TFT content, but this set it felt like I couldn't take a single day off, and I wanted to stay up to date in touch with the game. So this one's tricky. There's a lot to break down here. But first off, let's just say our goal is that balanced thrashing is bad. If anyone says anything else, they're just lying. Balanced thrashing is bad. We do not want balanced thrashing. What we want is if you learn the duelist comp on day one and you get really, really good at the duelist comp, that there shouldn't be a point where the duelist comp is like an absolute bait and you shouldn't be playing it. Like, that is absolutely a goal. We do not want balanced thrashing. Oh, someone asked what's balanced thrashing? Balanced thrashing is basically the state of balance changing radically from one patch to another. So, for example, if when the game comes out, duelists are terrible and you should never play duelists, and then 4 days later, because of a B patch, duelists are now the best comp in the game, you've balance thrashed. That's not what you want to do. So, balance thrashing is very, very bad. The other way works off also, right? If Ashe is the best comp in the game and 2 days later Ashe is unplayable, you've balance thrashed. So balance thrashing is bad. Now, that being said, I think a lot of the times people will cry balance thrashing when it's not balance thrashing, right? And again, I'm making up examples here, but if Duelist was S tier and now Duelist is B tier, and people go balance thrashing, and it's like, no, that's just balance. That's not balance thrashing. That's balance. So we do have to balance. But that being said, I think this person brings up good points that like this set, yeah, there were some pretty bad cases, right? Like one of the things that happened was at the start of the set, it was 3-cost rerolls and 5 costs. And then a week later, all of a sudden it was 4 costs, no 3-cost rerolls. Like 3-cost reroll was mostly impossible, and 4 costs were good and 5 costs were meh. That is balance thrashing, right? Like we've definitely screwed that up. Now, someone said, what are you doing to combat that? One of the challenges is, and this is something I don't talk about that often, but if you look at TFT behind the scenes, I think people look at like, there's a balance team, right? There's a balanced team. We don't really talk about who's on the balance team, but has that balance team been the same for 5 years? No. We've had people come and go. We've had people change. And And so part of it is like, as people come and go and change, there is a bit of relearning and re-ramping. And the thing about that is when you've got, people learning how to balance TFT, and it's a game that's really, really hard to balance, and you make one tiny mistake and it creates balance thrashing, it happens. It's rough. So we're doing our best, but I'm not going to lie and say like, oh, it's easy. We just do this thing and balance thrashing is gone. No, it's freaking hard, right? And like, I have seen some of the smartest people make some of the silliest mistakes, and it's hard. But the thing is, what are we doing is we're definitely making it clear that like balance thrashing is not the thing. And pretty much every patch notes, when we go through it, it's like, we take a very close look and it's like, is this too much? Is this too much? A really good example is this patch. There was the, Reaper 4 buff, Yone buff, Kane buff, and there was one other part. And it's like, or there was one other part, and we looked through the patch and we're like, no. Let's pull one. Let's be safe. So we're definitely putting a close eye to it. Crazy how I haven't had many stakes yet. I'm just too good. All right, this Alex guy. Yeah, but again, it's definitely one of the challenges. We're definitely doing our best to fix it. There's no magic answer here. There's no magic solve, but what I can tell you is you're absolutely right. And the feeling that you're feeling of like, I couldn't take a single day off, we want to avoid that. So that is something we want to avoid. I wish I had a better answer for you, but this is one of those like, why haven't you solved this really hard, complex problem? And it's like, because it's really hard and complex. So, yeah. What do you think is the biggest core problem in TFT today, and how do you plan to fix it? Okay, so this one's tricky. I'm probably not going to be able to tell you how I plan to fix it, because that's like overcommitting to something that may or may not ship. So I'm going to have to dodge that part of the question. But what I think is the biggest core problem in TFT today right now is bag sizes in relations to cost of units. And what I mean by that is the old, like, when 3-cost reroll is good, everyone in the lobby should be playing 3-cost reroll, because if you pull out all the bards and you pull out all the Yones, I can get all the Sorakas, and it'll be easier. And if I'm like, hey, instead I'm going to go play Ashe, I'm worse, because the way our bag sizes work is the more people pull out of them, the easier it is to hit things. I think that is still, and has been for a long time, one of the biggest fundamental problems of TFT, and why you see some of that balance thrashing we talked about earlier, where it's just like, surprise, now because Ashe is good, every 4-cost is better because everyone's pulling out the Ashes and the Nautiluses, and now that makes Kaisa better, and now that makes Syndra, but like, that has been one of the toughest things to balance around, and definitely been one of the biggest things we need to fix. Now, what I can say is we do actually, for the first time, have a couple different solves that we think might help this, but they're in testing, they're a ways off. Again, I don't want to promise we're shipping something, but we're looking at it. It feels like the first time we're actually making progress on this problem. So, yeah. Cool. Triple bag size confirmed. Perfect. What does TFT mean in your life? How would you describe it? No, this one's a tricky one. I think it's weird because it's probably different for me than it is for someone like Kent, or someone newer like Milo or something like that. But for me, TFT is interesting because I'm on the tail end of my career, right? Like I had been a designer for 14 years before TFT. And a lot of what I had to do at Nintendo was like work on games that I'm not a huge fan of, but I needed to learn, right? Puzzle games, a crosswords puzzle game. Even League of Legends, it was like, I get to work on League, but like monetization stuff? But I'll do it to prove I can do it. TFT was like the first time I finally got to like work on a game that I was kind of enjoying. I kind of got to like cut loose a little bit and like be the designer I want to be and do the systems and the brain stuff I want to be. I want to do, and it's kind of nice to finally get to do that after like 14 and 15 years, to just like make the games I want to make and make them fun the way I want to make them. So for me, it's like it's a goal. It's like reaching the goal. It's like I get to make games the way I think games should be made now, which is great. And I hope I get to keep doing that for a long time. But that's the thing that feels really good, right? Because again, the first 10 years of my career were make the game someone else tells you to make. So, and that's not to say like someone else didn't tell me to make TFT, but like Riot allows me enough, you know, leeway to like make TFT great the way I think it should be made. And so far that's worked out pretty well for them. So yeah, so I would describe it as the game I finally get to put my heart into. That's my answer. Cool. Mort retiring about as likely as you getting a raise. I mean, technically I've been at Riot long enough that I can get a sabbatical, and to which my boss was like, the idea of Mort taking a sabbatical is laughable. So you're not wrong. All right, what factors do you look at when considering if craftable items should be reworked, replaced, as opposed to number adjustments? Do you think the current craftable items are in a good spot? This is a great question. One of the things that makes a game hard to learn is if core systems change dramatically, right? So if you haven't played TFT in 3 sets and you come back and now our item system is replaced with a dartboard that you throw darts at to get items, your brain's going to be like, huh? What just happened? The item system is one of those core systems that we try really, really hard not to change, because it's the kind of thing that like coming back and knowing that bow plus rod makes Ginsu's feels good. It's like, it doesn't matter what set I am, I can make the Ginsu's. That feels good. What's interesting is we've tried to like mess with that a bit. Like for example, recently Tim tried to make some adjustments when he was doing like the Sterix stuff, and he moved Ginsu's to bow. And logically you're like, I get it. I get why Ginsu's, the item that gives you a bunch of attack speed, should be bow. But it's like, no, stop it. Players are so used to Ginsu's being bow rod. Don't do that. We need to keep the system in a good a spot as it is. So that's one of the reasons why like Titans has been bow armor for so long. That's one of the reasons why Ginsu's hasn't changed, stuff like that. We try not to change them as much as we can. Now, the question is, what factors do you look at if it should be replaced? A big factor is how much it's being built and if it has a distinct identity from other items, right? If there's a clear reason where it's like, I build this item because I need it for here, it's probably in a good spot. I think a good example of this is like Bloodthirster. Bloodthirster's in a great spot. I'm a melee champion. I need some healing. Bloodthirster. Great job. We did it. I think when it gets to a point where there's not a distinct reason, and the best example of this right now is why do you build Sterix over Titans? If you can make a decision of when you build Sterix over Titans, let me know, because right now there's not a great reason, and so maybe we need to rework one of those, you know, because there's not a good, clear, distinct reason. And the problem is, you know, you said why as opposed to just number adjustments. Well, if you look at like Sterix and Titans, if I buff Sterix, guess what happens? You build Sterix and not Titans. If I buff Titans, you build Titans and not Sterix. That's not good, right? Because the numbers aren't solving the problem. So you have to figure out a reason. And like an example of good here is like blue buff and Shojin, right? There's a very clear reason to build blue buff versus Shojin. But Sterix and Titans, not so much. So do you think the current craftable items are in a good spot? I mean, I kind of spoiled my hand a little bit that I think Sterix is like not great. So, but there's a couple others that I'm like, are they really the right items? Are they really the right thing? One, for example, I'm personally not a fan of, but I don't know that we'll ever rework it. I'm just calling it as one I'm personally not a fan of, is Archangels. I think the difference between Deathcap and Archangels is so minute that it barely matters. So I'd rather see a more distinct reason to build Archangels. But that's kind of the big thing, is like making sure there's a distinct reason to build them. What are your thoughts on Fortune as the only economic trait of a set? How do you balance the fun of econ traits versus the competitive use of them? Ooh, this is a good question, and I feel like now I'm spoiling part of the learning article we already wrote, but I'll try to dive into this without spoiling too much of that article. But generally, high-risk traits are fun. We know high-risk traits are super duper duper fun. Heartsteel is fun, Fortune's been fun, things like that. The challenge is, for these traits to be fun, they generally have to be overpowered at the best level. Fortune right now, I think, is incredibly balanced. Fortune is probably the most balanced high-risk trait we've ever had. And you know what that means? It means it's terrible for 99% of our players. It's terrible. Terrible, terrible. But it's balanced. You watch Setsuko play this thing? Dude wins games. You watch any other human play this trait? Nah, not great. And so that's been tricky. That's been tricky. Yeah, someone in chat just said, I feel Fortune is the worst econ trait by miles. Right, because it's balanced, right? Whereas like every other econ trait has not been balanced. And that's the tricky part. So I think one of our challenges in the future is figuring out if there's different ways to approach high-risk traits without having them be OP. Because let's not beat around the bush. Heartsteel was overpowered. Piltover was overpowered. Like, in the hands of really good players, they were overpowered. So, by balanced, do you mean balanced around the best players? Yes, which is how we balance TFT. We balance TFT around the best players. So it's a thing we have to look at, but again, we don't treat these traits any different than any other trait, which is we do balance around the competitive use of them. That just has to be the reality. At least with Fortune, there's a fun out where if you can get the 2 Fortune emblems, you get 7 Fortune, which is like wildly strong. But yeah, it's a challenge. Ooh, I like this question. This question's easy, but also you're gonna laugh. Okay. What item has been the most design limiting when making units and abilities? So this one's actually really easy. Blue buff. Blue buff is so incredibly design limiting. It's like, because blue buff exists, you can't have anything of like 10 mana or 20 mana. It's like 30 mana is the minimum. And even then, when you make a 30 mana champion, guess what item they must have to be functional? Blue buff. It's like literally every 30 mana champion in the game is like, that's a blue buff champion. So every range, like you can't make ranged low mana units without blue buff. It is so limiting. Like Kent and I have for years wanted to like delete blue buff and Shojin. But we lose another access of items, which feels bad, and players like them, so we don't delete them. No one uses blue buff on Silas? You're right. So again, that's why I said ranged. Melee mana champions are fine, right? Because Riven and Silas aren't going to lose an entire item just to have 10 less mana because of the way mana generation works right now. But ranged champions, it's like you need those items. The best we did was at least now 30 mana users can use blue buff or Shojin. At least it's not one or the other. But it used to be you had to have blue buff, and it was just so limiting. So blue buff, yeah, I don't like blue buff. Even though it's funny, because the champions I play a lot, Teemo, Brand, stuff like that, the dot champions in the past, Malzahar, Cassio, those are my favorite champions. But like, again, that's because they all have to have blue buff. Have you tried playing Teemo without a blue buff or a Shojin? It's terrible. What would less focus on multiplicative scaling do to TFT? TFT rewards balancing different stats, but balanced stats feel less fun than a single big number. Ginsu's and health stacking mechanics seem very popular among players. Part of me wants 3 Warmogs to be best in slot playing bruisers just to see really big health bars. I'm curious why TFT isn't designed that way and what that type of design would do to the fun, balance, and depth of the game. So this one's tricky because I actually agree with you. I think putting 3 Warmogs on a champion is the fantasy. I think putting 3 Ginsus on a champion is the fantasy. I actually agree with you. There's just something, Linda would call it smooth-brained. There's something smooth-brained about putting 3 of the same item on a champion and seeing good results. And big number. Make number big. I actually agree with you. As far as why we haven't changed that, the reality is we need different stats, so that we have enough different stats to have different items, different outputs, different traits, things like that. And then with those stats, math comes in, right? Like we can't break math. It turns out like if you have crit and damage amp, the way math works is having some of each is good. That's how multiplication works. The only way to really solve that would be to have them all be additive to each other, at which point your choices no longer matter, which is also not great. The only other thing we could do would be some sort of like distinct thing where it's like the more health you get, it scales off of itself, and build in some like very designer hand-wavy rules that are like, make sure you get lots of the same thing, which is also not great. So, yeah, there's no real easy way to like break math here, but I do agree with you that like there's something in the brain that just like, I want to put 3 Warmogs on a champion. So I don't know. That's actually a fun one to think about. Like if someone came to me and was like, make 3 Warmogs better than Warmog's Bramble Dragonclaw, how would you do that? There's a bunch of ways you could approach that. See, this is how my brain works, by the way. If someone comes to me and is just like, make this true, okay. Because one of the cool parts about it being a game designer is essentially you have unlimited power, right? You can design a system to make anything true. So what do you do to make that true, right? What system change do you do? I said doo-doo. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get too deep into the design rabbit hole, but again, you bring up a good point. So you can't really see if a champion has 200 armor, but you can see that they have plus 1,000 health, and a health bar feels so much nicer. Agree 100%. This is one of the reasons why I actually tell the team that like anytime they make a champ that says like gain 100 armor for 4 seconds, it's like, that doesn't feel good. But you know what feels good? Gain a bunch of health or gain a big fat old shield. Like those feel good, right? And so that is absolutely true, that the feeling of seeing that thing get bigger definitely is a lot better, for sure. No argument there. When designing a TFT set, how much focus is placed on the competitive scene versus the casual player base? I've held the belief that the game needs to first and foremost be fun to play, even at the cost of balance, before even considering the possibility of trying to make competitive. And was curious to hear your thoughts as a veteran game designer. So the short answer is you're right. Also, I'm going to start saying every answer is tricky because someone in chat was like, Mort always says it's tricky. Then I'm going to also say nothing too crazy. That way I just use all my quotes all at the same time. Okay, but seriously, the thing here is, first off, the thing you can do to really help reset your mindset is there's no such thing as competitive versus casual. Like even calling it casual is a disservice. And this is something that, Nintendo's really good at, is you have your players. That's it. This is your player base. This is your player base. That's your player base are players. There's no such thing as a casual, right? There are players who like different parts about your game. There are people like, there is a gold player who plays 500 games a casual? No, they're not. Is a challenger player who gets to, is a masters player who plays 60 games, gets to masters, then quit a casual? Probably not. All we care about is the game and our player base. So when designing a set, the first thing we do, and this is where you're just right, is we make sure the set is fun, right? The first thing we do is like, what would be fun? What would be cool? What would be amazing? What would make this game really fun so that everyone is having a great time, whether it be Soju or my daughter or some random person who only plays 2 games. I want them all to have fun with TFT. Then as we build that, people like the finalization team, the live team will come in and go, cool, now let's bring that into like reality and like, let's make sure that it actually is like balanced and competitive and makes sense. And the trick is when you do that, you have to bring it down, but not take out all the fun, right? And I always like the example of Cruel Pact here, right? Like Kent made Cruel Pact, and is Cruel Pact good for the competitive gamer? But it would have been easy to just be like, no, this is too not competitive, throw away Cruel Pact. But instead, it's like, how do we make Cruel Pact work for the competitive while keeping the fun? And it's like, well, the fun is that you can, get to level 7 early and build a cool team. And so we balance around that. And so, yeah, so the TLDR here is, yes, focus on making your game fun first. And then when it's fun, go from there. But the hardest part about making a video game is making sure it's fun. And if your video game isn't fun, no one's going to play it. So always make sure your game is fun. That is number one most important thing. Oh, goody, this question. Oh, wait, hang on. I gotta get all the question. This is a question. Who is your favorite finalization team member whose name starts with an I? Follow up to that, who is your least favorite coworker whose name rhymes with went? Lastly, what is your favorite trait from a past set that lets its units cast twice, has no forecast, and can beat a 9 Bilgewater Shen 3? Okay. So, who is my favorite finalization team member whose name starts with an I? Well, let's see. Of the total options, there's only one, so Iniko. Follow up to that, who's your least favorite coworker whose name rhymes with went? Poor Kent. Poor Kent. And lastly, what is your favorite trait from a past set that lets its units cast twice, has no forecast, and can beat a 9 Bilgewater Shen 3? So, I haven't talked about this story much because it's a mean story, but so here's what I'm gonna tell you. You guys remember the multicaster patch? Do you guys remember the multicaster patch? I was advising, but the multicaster patch happened. The people responsible for the multicaster patch were instructed to B-patch. They did not B-patch hard enough. Multicaster was still a thing. Then we go into the TFT Rumble finals for the Riot employees, and I'm in the final lobby, and so is Iniko, and so is Tim. Two people that were helping with the multicaster. And Iniko was one-tricking multicaster, and in this game, I high-rolled like crazy. I hit 9 Bilgewater, I hit Shen 3, Shen was a 4-cost, so I have a 3-star 4-cost, 9 Bilgewater prismatic trait. And you know what I lose to? Iniko's reroll multicaster. I lost to that. I was probably more angry than I should have been at the time, but it was like, and keep in mind, players are like yelling at me for being an idiot about multicaster, which is fine. That's my job. But it was like, yeah, I was not thrilled. Now, it ended up not mattering, I don't think, because I still got second. Like, I got second, and I don't think that 1 point would have made a difference. But, it was a learning moment for lots of people. So, yeah, it is what it is. But I do love my finalization team, and Iniko's been doing great. His work on set 12 is going really, really well. So, some good stuff there. Ooh. Okay. Let's keep going. Iniko's working on set 12. Iniko is part of the finalization pod. They work on every set. So technically, Iniko works on every set. Aha! Why does every champion need to be a carry? I played support in League and a healer in WoW. I really enjoy the idea of support champions in TFT, but you seem to be against champions whose primary purpose is to heal, buff, or shield other units. I feel like this video game role is largely avoided in TFT in newer sets. This question is great. This is the question, and I want to tell you that, like, I'm probably in the minority on this one. I know every new designer that comes in is like, I want to make support champions. I want to make support champions. Why can't I make support champions? And if if you're like somebody who likes support champions and you're like, why aren't they in TFT? You can blame me. Like, this is 100% my fault. And here's the reason for it. The problem is, in TFT, the way you build a team is you have 8 champions, right? So here's 8 champions as a level 8 team, and you're going to have enough items to put on 2 or 3 of them. Probably your carry, and a tank. And then everyone else is itemless. Support champions inherently do not scale well with items at all, right? So if you have, like, let's go back all the way to set 6 Janna, or set 4 Janna, which are Enlightened Janna, 2 cost. All she did was shield 2 people and give them an AD buff. Giving her items was bad. You should not be giving her items, right? Like, you're not going to win a fight by putting a death cap on a Janna. All they do is delay fights. They don't end fights. And so it's always incorrect to put items on these champions. And so what that does is it creates support champions become literally the best champions to put in your comp because you can't have items on them. It's always true. Someone just said, what about Orianna? She could carry? No, stop. She could not. It took forever, and it took a ton of buffs and lowering the shield value. Don't rewrite history. Orianna was not a carry for most of the set. Yeah, and so all of these champions end up in the situation where they become the best champions to not put items on, it lowers the number of combinatorics that you can build a comp around. Joy is the most famous version of this, the Janna Orianna Yuumi, where it was like always correct to have Joy in your comp without items on them, and then build everyone else around that, because they were just the best support champions to have in your trait. And so the version I've had us go to is that you can put support items on them, sure. The version I've had us move to is that 80% of a champion's output, 80 to 90%, should always be damage. And then they can have an additional hook that is support. I think set 11 Janna is the best example of this. I like set 11 Janna. Her shields are actually pretty chunky, but she ends fights. And that's the thing. When you put items on a champion, they need to end fights. The other example of this I really love, it's a personal favorite of mine, is set 8 Sona. Set 8 Sona was really good because what did she do? She's like, damage, heal, stun, and damage. Damage, heal, stun, and damage. But again, putting items on her still ended fights. And that's the thing that has to be true for a support champion, is you need to put items on them and they end fights. They do not need to stall fights out. And so that's why I'm so against pure support champions. Really good example, like one of the best examples of this recently also was the set revival with Soraka. What did 4-cost Soraka do? Heal everybody. What happens if you hit 3-star Soraka? She heals everybody a lot. Woo! And then you still lose the fight. Cool. So yeah, that's the big thing. So the framework is you have to put items on them and they have to end fights. There are creative ways to do that, but yeah. Cool. You and the team were positive on threats as a class when reviewing set 8. Yes. And you were praising Robot Blitzcrank in the Rankings 2-cost video. Yes. We haven't seen a lot of threat-like champs recently, especially outside of the 5-cost space. Why is that? So there's no particular reason, actually. And you're right. Threats are a big positive. We love threats. I can tell you that at least one future set in the future has threat-like things in it. That's the vague answer I'll tell you. Threats are great. They're a tool in our toolbox that we can use. As far as why they haven't been used recently, because the set designers didn't grab that tool out of the toolbox. That's it. Threats are cool, though. I think I always go back to Morgana and Rammus. I think are two of some of the best units in TFT of all time. Those champions were great. I'm so happy they existed. It was like, I just need a tank to make some cool things work. I've got Rammus. I need some extra utility. I've got Morgana. Like, those were so good. So yeah, it's really just a question of like, whenever a set designer is like, I need this tool in my toolbox, they can go grab it. So yeah, agree, threats are going to be great, but there's really no reason they haven't been used other than they just weren't picked. Now, that being said, it does have to be the right threat, right? Like, for all as all the nice things I'm saying about threats, there were some garbage threats too. I think the 5-cost threats were actually not great. I think Vel'Koz was a someone in chat just asked, what is a threat in this context? So for those who don't know, in set 8, we had a trait called threat. And what it was the champion, their only trait was threat. So they had no class, they had no origin. And they were very like flexible units. You could just throw them in your comp. And that was neat. So that's what threats were. Is there any room for faster, better matchmaking as hyper-roll rating gets very high? I understand this is a very niche case, as there are only a handful of players with rating high enough for this to occur, and there may not be that many players available for the mode as a whole, but having to wait 6 minutes for every game gets a little bit tiring, especially as the mobile client allows for very little else during the queue time. Yeah, this one, sorry, not to use the quote, but this one is tricky. The thing about our like League of Legends and TFT matchmaking is that, and MMR and ranking and stuff like that, is that it's a really, really good system for 99.9% of our players. For most of our players, the system's really good at finding you even matchmaking, pairing you up against people you need to fight, finding you a queue pretty good. Everything's great. The problem is, for that last 0.1, the system falls apart hard. Some examples of where this falls apart. Raptor's in chat, and I'm going to pick on him again. But turns out when you have 2100 LP, it's really hard to find a match with anyone else who's also 2100 LP when there isn't anybody. Crazy. So when you start to hit that like literally top 10, it's hard. Because the challenge is, if we just keep matching you with people that are 1000 LP below you, you end up in these matches where like even a first place gives you 10. So that feels bad. Another example is like if you get your LP really, really, really high and then you decay doesn't hit your MMR. So you end up in this situation where your MMR is like 1500 LP, but your rank is Master 0 and it can't find anyone. And that feels bad. So, yeah. I do think there are some clear areas to improve for that 0.1%, but the trick is you have to come up with solutions to solve it for those players that don't lead to weird things where it's like, one of the worst examples we've seen is like your 1700 LP, and then you're 1700 LP, and then you wait till it's like Tuesday night at 2 a.m, and you know no other high elo players are going to be playing. So you wait the 20 minutes, you end up queuing up with some Masters players, you beat them, gain your LP, and slowly do that to climb up because it's the best way to climb with the least risk, right? Like, Challenger players will find those kinds of exploits to find like loopholes in your system to climb, and we have to make sure none of those loopholes exist. And so that's the kind of stuff we have to be really careful of, where it's like, oh, but if I'm at the top, just match me with these other players. And that becomes the most efficient way to climb. So yeah, it's definitely a tricky problem. And so I don't think it's one of those things that there's just an easy snap here. But I get it. Like, you know, the thing you talked about where it's like 6 minutes, every time I do my hyper roll climb for rank 1 at the start of a set, I go through this too, because I get to like 3,800 and then it's 6 minute queue to a bunch of people who are 2,100, and you're like, sure hope I get my 20 LP. Woo! So I feel you. How could you improve the current scouting system? Is there any chance to majorly update the current system, or would it need to be something completely new? Units influencing capabilities of scouting could also be interesting. Or do you think that scouting is fine as is? I almost said it. I'm not going to say it. Scouting is interesting because scouting is the kind of thing where it's one of those things we added to TFT that other auto battlers didn't have, and it makes the game feel more alive. Like when you see people scouting you, it's like, those are humans playing the game. I'm not just playing against bots. And that's something that is important to TFT, even though people will be like, that's not really relevant. I just want like my tab to like see their board. No, scouting creates this like, there are 8 players playing TFT. It's great. That being said, do I really enjoy the last minute APM shuffle your boards, people using scripts that are getting banned to try to move? Like, no, I hate that stuff. Like, I would love to find ways to fix that. The original auto chess actually messed with this as well. There was a unit they had where if it was on your bench was transparent and no one could see your bench, which was silly and not that great. So I don't know. It's something we could experiment with, but generally when we've tried, it hasn't gone well. We've also talked about the version where like, hey, after 5 seconds, scouting, like with the last 5 seconds, scouting doesn't change and like people's boards won't change. Well, all that does is put weird APM things at 5 seconds, right? There's always some marker where it's time to like optimize it. So basically the TLDR here is I don't know that there's any easy like massive improvement to scouting. I don't think it's like the most elegant or best system of all time, but I don't think there's an easy win here. So for now, I think we're kind of like, it is what it is. So oh, goody. Although competitive fairness and fun in TFT can often mean similar things, sometimes they differ. For example, Soju and Mort's differing opinions on Recombobulator. I believe having 1% odds to hit 5 costs at level 7 is bad for competitive fairness. But I understand how it can be super fun, especially for casual players. Do you agree that these two examples, that they are bad for the game's competitive integrity but good for the game's fun factor? And if so, how does the team try to strike a balance between the two? So, no, I don't agree. I don't agree. Again, I talked about this before with my line graph before, but I'll try to do this again here. Competitive players, and I use quotes here because it's not really competitive, seem to want the game to always play out on this like exactly predictable line curve where people 2-star their 1 cost in stage 2, 2-star their 3 costs in stage 3, 2-star their 4 costs in stage 4, and start hitting their 5 costs in stage 5. And like anything that goes against that natural order of game flow is incorrect and bad for the game. And the second somebody hits a 2-star 4 cost on stage 3, it's bad for the game. Or the second they have a 4 cost on 2-3, bad for the game. Like, that's not how TFT works. There are high rolls and low rolls. There are variants within the variant systems. And so, you know, there's going to be a, you know, difference, essentially a spectrum of outputs that can happen. So those spectrums are important. For example, you know, you mentioned the 1% odds to hit 5 costs at level 7. If you're playing duelists, let's say you're playing duelists, and you get a 1% Hui in your shop. Is that bad for the game? No, that's totally fine for the game. It's like, cool, you now have an interesting decision. One of the things we go for when that happens is we want you to look at that and go, oh, is there a play here? Is there some clever thing where I like take the Hui and start using it to clone Kiana's to hit a 3-star Kiana? Or do I just skip it and not waste the 5 gold, right? Like, these are the decisions that essentially create the skill of the game. Now, that being said, as someone just in chat said, but if you get Aurelia, yes, there are high rolls. No different than if you get a 2-star Lee Sin, or if you get an early vault. Like, yes, you can point to many things in the game that go, if I get this, I'm at an advantage. That's how TFT works. Duh. If you haven't accepted that by now, as we're 5 years in, I don't know what to tell you. But we are certainly not going to take the game and make it incredibly predictable and go, now it's competitive. Definitely not what we're doing. Recombobulator is another example of this. It's a little bit more of an extreme one, but especially like the Recombobulator encounter, it appears for everyone. If you don't use it, you at least get 5 gold. And yes, someone might be in a good spot to hit a slightly higher part on that line graph, but it's part of the game. That's a decision they made. So I just don't agree with this statement, and I don't think that anything that isn't on the standard line is now all of a sudden non-competitive. So I disagree, and I will continue to stand by that. And 1% 5 cost odds are not there for fun. They're there because they create interesting decisions, and they're good for the game, and they're not going anywhere. So any plans to improve double up and remove the workshop tag? In some sets, it doesn't seem to be taken into account much, such as some traits not working well with reinforcements. So the short answer is, are there any plans to improve double up? Yes. Soon? I don't know about soon, but there are plans. I can tell you there are plans in the pipeline. In some sets, it doesn't seem to be taken into account much. So the reality of our game dev is, and this isn't a good thing, but I'm just telling you the truth, is sometimes as we're finishing a set, it comes in pretty hot. Things are looking pretty tough here. We're trying to get it in the right spot. And one of the final things we do, it's in the final month, is we make sure the set works really well with hyper roll and double up. And so if a set is coming in really, really hot, sometimes that double up and hyper roll stuff gets missed and doesn't end up in as good of a spot. And that's on us. That's one of the reasons why we're trying to move to the 3 sets a year, so we have more time to really nail that stuff and getting it right. But that's just the truth of the matter, is that sometimes that comes in hot. Anytime you see anything like that, definitely call it out. We'll be sure to fix it as quick as we can. But yes, reinforcements in particular create a lot of issues, what things should reinforce and not. So agree. We're at 43 in an hour and a half. That's not bad. Although the numbers might be wrong. I don't know. I don't know how many questions I've done. We'll see. Oh, okay, quick drink. About 2? Okay, well, I've done 2 questions. Perfect. Thanks, Nino. Are there any remaining areas in the game that are an unintended challenge that you may add a feature to help in the same way the team builder made memorizing your team and spotting them in the shop a lot easier? I think the answer is lightly. What I mean is that I think there are things we could do, especially for people who are less experienced, that I don't necessarily think the challenger players of the world need, but I do think there are areas that could improve. For example, let's say you are at 5 Story Weaver, and it's pretty clear you're looking to play vertical Story Weaver. Should we highlight 6 and 7 story, the Zoe in the shop when it appears, so that you don't miss it? Maybe we should. Maybe we should help people figure out. Some chat's mentioning the item bench. Yep, the item bench is certainly one that could use some love here. So there's definitely still some quality of life things that we could do to the game to make it better. I think that's something, if anything, I think one of the more impressive things of the last 5 years is just how much of that we've snuck in random patches. It's surprise, now there's this item inspect thing that lets you see all the items. Surprise, now there's this team builder. And so I think the short answer is the team may continue to keep surprising you with some things that can happen. So, yeah. This is a replay of an old stream. His announcement is Blender will be making its comeback while Mort joined Valve to improve their Dota Underlord game. Yeah, item popped off a carousel. Yeah, that's another good one. Are there plans of changing the cost structure of units? Since the start of the auto battler genre, we always had 1 to 5 cost units, except 7 cost Lux. Well, that's not true. We also had 6 cost Nomsy and Zippy, and 8 costs and 10 costs. We haven't had any 9 costs, though. Will there be changes like 1 to 7 costs as the game gets more and more resources and we play for level 10? So, not soon, for sure. But this is the kind of thing that, as we get more time to push the genre, maybe we'll explore it, right? What happens if we change the cost structure to have 1 through 8 costs? Or what happens if they're not gold-based, but over time the champs change that are available? So the 1 costs available in stage 2 are different than the 1 costs available in stage 4. There's a lot of stuff that you could experiment with and, change here. And keep in mind, I'm literally just making this up to answer this question. These aren't real examples. But it's the kind of thing that with enough time and resources, you could experiment with and push, and finding things like that become new mechanics or new things like that are how we got 8 cost and 10 cost dragons. So I don't know. The short answer is no. There won't be. There's no plan to change the cost structure of units right now, but I think experimenting with it would be pretty fun. And you never know. You might find something really cool there. So. Are there plans to diversify design to recognize other types of skill expression besides composition flexing? There's skill and flexibility required to successfully force the same comp every game. Lately, it feels like there feels like less diversity of forcible comps. Okay. I mean, it's a fair question. It's a fair question, and we know there are a lot of people that do like to force the same comp over and over. But I think the reality is in TFT, the core skill that we are testing is we give you various resources through shops and items, and your job is to take those resources and build the most powerful board you can. And so I think if at any point forcing is optimal, we are not living up to that primary goal. That primary goal of playing to the resources you have stops being true. And so I guess the answer is probably not, at least this type of skill expression. I do think there is other skill expression, especially at the highest level. I think one of the best people to listen to about this is like Dish Soap, and he'll talk about like, you know, how much skill is still undiscovered around positioning and things like that. But I don't really think we're ever going to get to a point where like forcing and learning how to force. But like, keep in mind, in the past, it already has been true, right? Like Milk got to Worlds by essentially learning how to be the literal best, you know, Kled Yordle player on the planet. So it's not like it hasn't been true in the past, but again, it's not the primary goal. So this is a weird question. Career-wise, what do you think is next for you? I mean, set 12? Set 13? Set 14? I don't know. I mean, in the short term, I mean, we got more sets to make. We got more things to do. I guess if you're wondering, like, when and if I ever leave TFT, what would I do after TFT? I'm going to change the question to that, I suppose. And I think the answer is it really depends. I've said before on stream that my dream game is to make a Metroidvania, and I would love to make a Metroidvania at some point. But I think I'm in the position right now where really what I want to do is whatever Riot needs me to do. If Riot is ever, like, let's say hypothetically tomorrow Riot was like, quick, we need you to make a crosswords puzzle game, and that's your job now. Okay, I'm making the Riot crossword puzzle game. Is what it is. But if today they're like, hey, we need you to keep making TFT great, I'm going to keep making TFT great. So, I don't know. Until they tell me something different, TFT? Set 12? Set 13? Set 14? So, but who knows? I try not to think too far in the future. I try to think, 5 years at most. So, Carousel is a very frustrating experience when items, units that you've wanted, especially as first pick, are either spawned on the opposite side of you or move away from you. Is there the possibility of Carousel being removed in the future and either replaced with a UI feature where we can pick our units and items in turns, or is this mechanic here to stay for TFT's lifespan? So, Carousel is definitely one of those things that's been around since set 1. And it's the kind of thing that we definitely want to challenge. Like, should it still be around? Should it be the thing we want to keep? But the experience you're talking about, I don't know. There's something I get that it's frustrating, but if you're in 8th place and you really want the rod, and on the other side is the rod and the 7th place person takes it, I don't know that I want to remove that. I don't really think being in 8th place means you 100% get the item you want. I don't think that's something we want, because then it makes open forwarding too good and things like that. If you can't use one of the other 7 components, that goes back to that flexibility thing. So as far as of all the reasons to get rid of Carousel, that's not high on my list as far as reasons to get rid of Carousel. But one example of it's like the one APM thing that still exists in mobile that's a little weird. So that's not great. I think one of the worst parts about carousel is when you click and you just end up with the wrong thing. That can be frustrating. Is hyper roll really bad because it only has one carousel or no carousels? Not really. So I don't know. It's the kind of thing we'll experiment with. Nothing to announce right now, though. Like, for now, carousel's not going anywhere. It's still part. What I will say is I'm so glad we got rid of the opening carousel, and opening carousel won't come back, over my dead body. I will never bring back the opening carousel. So, yeah. Could there ever be a way to implement gifting friends TFT cosmetics? Probably. It's just the kind of thing we just need to implement. Has to be prioritized. Ooh, this is another one that kind of spoils the learning article a bit, but oh well. Do you feel like TFT has gotten too complex? It seems like every set adds another layer of complexity to the game, making it harder for the team to balance and harder for players to keep up with the meta. So do I think it has gotten too complex? No. But do I think we are at our I keep calling it our complexity ceiling. We are at the complexity ceiling. I do not think we can add another feature to TFT right now without the game being too complex. That's just not a thing we can do. We just can't. The game is at its limit. My boss, Peter, I actually trigger him. If I want to troll my boss, Peter, I'll just say oh yeah, that set 12 mechanic, we're going to keep that around permanently. And he's like, I will end you, Mort. I will end you, Mort. I will end you. Because the game's at its limit. So if anything, what we need to do is find the right places to pull out complexity so that we can still add stuff that we want to. But yeah. So we are at our limit, and anything we add, we have to cut. We have some ideas for things we want to cut. I can't talk about those yet, but yeah, we definitely need to keep things this or lower, this or easier. So that's the big thing. Now, the thing I'll call out though is anything we remove though can't remove depth. So someone in chat says pull out encounters. Well, I have good news for you. Encounters will be pulled out next set, I promise. They are the set 11 mechanic. They will not be in set 12. Yay! So. Do you see a future to scale back some of the RNG that has slowly been added to TFT? Portals, augments, support and artifact and radiant items, and make a set that stands more on its units and traits and spells? Or are people too addicted to the constant power creep and casino-style RNG that each set seems to increase in? So, I mean, look, I don't like the wording of this question, obviously. But I will again go back to the core goal of TFT, the core thing, this is like a pillar that will not change, okay? Is that the way TFT works is each game you will get a different set of resources. This is power through champions, items, augments, whatever. This is your resources, and your job is to build the best team compared to everyone else. That is the core of TFT. That is not changing. So your question of if I want to take out things that will have, the variance, the RNG in it, let's say we take out, hypothetically, we take out portals and augments and support items and radiant items and artifacts. We can do that. They're all gone. And the game will still be true because, like you said, it'll stand on its champions and units. But the reality is, it'll be boring. It will lose a lot of its replayability. You will have figured out the set in about 100 games at most, and you will be done with it. And so a lot of these systems are intended to add combinatorics so that each game feels distinct and adds depth to the skill expression of adapting to those resources you've been given. That is the goal. And so, again, if you go back to set 1, there really wasn't much depth. It was like, yep, you know how to play these 4 comps, and that's it. It is what it is. And so if you want to call that variance casino style random, like, cool. You can slap whatever label on you want that makes you feel better. I can't stop you from doing that. But again, from a purely game design perspective, that variance and those combinatorics are important to replayability and important to adding depth and skill expression, and they're probably not going anywhere. And that's how I would phrase it, and that's the truth. And like I said, probably not going anywhere. So. Do you think TFT is big enough that the team can go for any champ idea and a skin or character will be made, such as the new Remix Rumble skins or Kobuko, at a more consistent scale? I don't know about more consistent scale, but what I will say is that every time we've done this so far, which I talked about this in the IGN Live interview actually, which was Silco, Soam, the Remix Rumble, the Superfans, what else? And Kobuko. It's been a success every time. It's landed well. It's been fun. Players have loved it. Alun, that's another one. And so I think we'll do more. Like, I think we will find opportunities to do more when it makes sense. I think limiting ourselves to literally just the TFT champion or League of Legends champions, probably not true. But I do think there's a limit, right? Like, let's say we made a set that had, I'll just start with half, 29 new units. Would I make that set? Probably not, because then it starts to lose its connection to the IP. So I probably wouldn't make that set. But I think, super fans are a good example where, like, yeah, we could add a good chunk of them. So who knows? But TLDR here is, yeah, I think we will probably continue to do this and add more of these, and it'll be great. So who knows? Maybe we've already got some planned. You'll never know. I'll never tell. Okay, do you think TFT having its own client would make the game a lot better? If some things are unbalanced or bugged, you might be able to fix it immediately. This is such a weird question, because this question comes from a good place. This person is asking a question of like, hey, I just want the game to be better more often. But it's being asked from a place of, there's probably a better word for it, but frankly, just ignorance on how things work. So do I think TFT having its own client would make the game a lot better? No, not a lot better. I think it would make the game better. I think it would make the game feel more modern. Do I love that TFT's client was made in 2008 out of paper and duct tape? No, not at all. But the client isn't the game, And so, like, let's pretend for a minute. Let's use our imagination that we take that client away and we give it a brand new 2024 client, and then like, whoa, and it looks like you can move around and whatever, and then you get in the game. The game is still the game, right? Like, TFT is still TFT. Nothing changed about TFT. The game is still fun. It still operates the way it does. That's working just fine. The only thing that changed is the out-of-game experience, right? This is stuff like, your battle pass and your shop and, looking around there, your match history, and like all that stuff's cool. That's great. Like, it would be an improvement. Maybe they meant engine and not the client. That's fair. Okay, I'll do the engine question in a second, but let's stick with client for now. I think the out-of-game experience being better is cool, but I don't think it makes the game significantly better. And then, you mentioned the, like, if things are unbalanced or bugged, you might be able to fix it immediately. So here's the thing. First off, currently, we already have micro patches, right? We do B patches. We've done emergency B patches and hot fixes. So it's not like there aren't things we can't fix immediately. So this is not a thing we can't do right now. The question is always, what determines it being bad enough that it needs to be fixed, right? Because some people like to think that, like, oh, hey, there's this one bug that happened 1 in 10,000 fights. You need to fix that right this second. And it's like, well, no, unfortunately, the cost versus return here, we can't fix that bug. But we've definitely seen, like, okay, someone in chat just said Syndra a few patches ago. No, that's another example where, like, Syndra was not so OP she needed an immediate micro patch. She just wasn't there. Players will disagree because they lost to Syndra, but that's not where it was, right? So like, we already have this capability to fix quickly. It is costly, but we can do that. The other thing, though, is that generally, like, the thing to note here is what League and TFT have done that's really cool is we have micro patches and patches. Micro patches are essentially us going in and changing like a single number in a single file and then like putting it back out there. And thanks to our clever engineers, we have a way that we can do that worldwide in a good way. Cool. Patches, though, are much harder. They're like much more a core part of how the entire game builds together. And getting that out to the world is much more complicated. Now, we already patch every 2 weeks. And a lot of people in the TFT and League scene are like, patch more, patch more, patch more. What game out there? Like, the video game industry has thousands upon thousands upon thousands of games. What game out there is patching more than that? I don't think there's a lot of them, if any. Right? Like, part of software development is that you have to like put it together, QA it, make sure it works, and get it. Like, we're already doing so quickly. So I don't know. I feel like a lot of the people that bring this up are people that are like so ingrained into the League and TFT ecosystem that they don't understand that that's just not how software development works. And so I think anyone asking for patching more than 2 weeks, a new client doesn't magically fix that. So now, to go back to the thing someone in chat said about like, well, maybe they meant engine. Okay, would TFT benefit from a new engine? Maybe. I mean, again, it would certainly make it feel more modern, but this is another interesting one where it's like, look at World of Warcraft. That game's almost 20 years old. Has it had a new engine? No. Would the game be magically better if it had a new engine? I mean, it'd run smoother, but it'd still be World of Warcraft. It wouldn't change much. And the cost to make that new engine would be really, really big. And in fact, I can't think of many games that have been like, here's a new engine for our existing live service game. That's just not a thing that happens in the industry. You get the upgrades, right? Like, this is like Street Fighter 5 to Street Fighter 6, new engine, but it's a new game. Like, cool. So I don't know, maybe someday you make like a sequel, but engine changes sync games regularly. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I don't think, like, this is one of those things that people who don't understand how game development works will point and go, this is the magic thing that cures all, but it really doesn't. So that being said, would it be cool? Hell yeah. It'd be really cool. Boom, boom. Are there plans to curb past, current, and future content that are harmful for photosensitive people? Generally, what I can say about this is we always double check our things to make sure that they're approved and can work for players who struggle with stuff like this. But everyone's different, and that bar is different for everyone else. And generally, if you give feedback that like something is an issue, I think the teams responsible for this kind of stuff will look into it and see if they can improve it in some ways. There have been some things that have been improved. I've seen certain finishers become better over time. So again, all these always follow like the normal approval process and work, but everyone's different. So leave feedback, let us know, and yeah. Bit of a generic answer, but just the truth. During your climb to Challenger many sets ago, you spoke about how awful the experience was. That's not what I said. I said it almost burned me out. I did not say it was awful. Since then, almost nothing has meaningfully changed to make ranked climbing a better experience. Is there anything that can be done to make this better? Okay, well, so again, I never said it was awful. I said it almost burned me out because I was working and playing a bunch and doing everything else. It's a good article, by the way. I really like that article. Since then, nothing has meaningfully changed to make the ranked climbing a better experience. Is there anything that can be done to make this better? So I'm going to look past the like, okay, Mort said it was bad because I didn't. But is there anything that can be done to make the ranked climb better? Probably. There's probably a lot of things that could be done. And I think it's the kind of thing that like the team is actually looking at. But here's the thing I'll tell you about ranked systems. Obviously, we've piggybacked off of League's ranked system because it's a system that works. A bad ranked system will sink a game. If you get this wrong, your game's dead, because like all of a sudden the climbing is no longer meaningful, and you know, like the motivation to play is like a bad ranked experience is one of the worst things you can do for a game. So if we're going to make improvements in this area, it's got to be done right. Do we think there's ways that can be done right? Yeah, probably actually. And so who knows, maybe we'll surprise you someday. And I know there's also different opinions, right? Like one of the common opinions I've seen before is, you know, some of our challenger players are like, why do I have to reset to iron every set? Just put me at like masters and I want to get back to the real game, right? And so like every decision like that has pros and cons and trade-offs. But again, what I can tell you is there's a team that is constantly looking at this right now and seeing if there's ways we can improve it. So pros and cons, and like I said, it's just, I think the reason you're not seeing much quickly is because, again, if you get it wrong, you're doomed. You have to be really careful. Favorite aspect of game development? Is it making art, balancing, designing new features, or something else? Okay, so I'm going to try to do this as vaguely as I can, because twice recently in the last month, I have gotten to work on a project. We'll call it Redacted A and Redacted B. And getting to work on Redacted A and Redacted B, both times with two other designers on a thing, those were some of the thing I liked the most. It's like we were given a problem, we went in a room, we accomplished the thing, built the thing, did whatever we did with the thing, and came out the other side, and everyone was like, whoa, Redacted A is so cool, good job. Redacted B is so cool, good job. That's my favorite thing to do. I love being thrown a problem or a thing, a goal, and accomplishing it with like really clever design, powering through, good vision, stuff like that. And so TFT related, yes, both of these were TFT related. And so those are my favorite thing. It's like building and solving a tough design problem, good stuff. So that's my favorite. Second favorite, because it's similar, is I actually like balancing TFT a lot, because balance is essentially an inherently very difficult spreadsheet / math problem. And I also like math. And so balancing TFT is also a lot of fun, because it's like, okay, which stat do we need to change to make this true? And what's the domino effect of this? And how's that happen? So yeah, those are probably my favorites. $10.50. All right, an hour or so until the announcement. Okay. Has your team attempted to expand the board space to enable other positional strategies? Are there any board variants that sound promising? So, hilariously enough, for those who don't remember, all the way back in the launch set, the board was actually 3 rows on each side, not 4. And in that board state, a common thing was everyone was like, hey, we want more space, we want more space. And so we gave them more space. We added a 4th row. And it added more space, but it had some drawbacks. It's funny, Whitrock is actually one of the people who loves talking about the drawbacks of this. And the 2 biggest drawbacks were, really there's no such thing as a 3-range champ in TFT anymore. It's like 1 range, 2 range, and 4 range. So we just have this like 3rd row of hexes that doesn't actually do much. No one ever really actually uses it much. But the bigger one, and this is the one that Witty's very insistent on, because Witty's very good at focusing on like game feel and presentation and stuff like that, is that we had to zoom the camera out. And so everything seems further away, and so it feels less good to like watch combats. With that camera zoomed out, everything is smaller, everything blends together more, and boards become a lot more hectic. If we changed expanded the board space, we do that even more. And for what it's worth, I think the 4 rows was correct, but I do agree with Witty that like any further would be incorrect. So realistically, do we plan on adding a 5th row or a 9th column anytime soon? Probably not. I think if there were going to be any other board variants in the future, it would have to be within the confines of what we have now. Fake example I'm making up, but let's say the front middle 2 hexes were just on fire and you couldn't use them. Sure, maybe. Does that really add that much to TFT? Not really. So, yeah. So TLDR here is probably not, and so far haven't seen anything that's been promising. Oh, this is a really good question. Why do we see in general that item stats are getting nerfed throughout the entirety of TFT? For example, Dragonclaw in set 1 used to block 70% of magic damage and had a 200 MR in set 2, 180 MR in set 3, and now poor Dragonclaw only provides 65 magic resist with HP regen. But still, almost all items provide less and less stats. This is 100% true, by the way. This person is spot on. Is this intended so that units can be designed to be more powerful without being too strong with certain items, or is it simply for ease of balancing? So the first. The problem was, let's say you had a 3-star, I'm gonna use live champions here. Let's say you had a 3-star Thresh, okay? You've got a 3-star Thresh, and you're up against an opponent's 1-star Garen, but they have set 1 Dragonclaw and Bramble Vest. Okay? Who wins? I'll give you a hint. It's not Thresh, and it's not even close. It's not even close. And that's kind of effed up, right? Like 3-star 3 cost versus 1-star 1 cost, but they have 2 items? That's kind of ludicrous. That was the big problem we were seeing, is that powering up your champions is supposed to be like really impactful and really cool, right? Like a 3-star champion should be really good, but so much of the power budget of the game was in items that all that really mattered in set 1 and set 2 was your items. Who cared what the champions were used? It's like you basically, the way real early TFT worked was build the best items, know who the best users of those items are, put them on them, you win. Doesn't matter the star level. You just that's you win. Get a Zed with GA redemption, you win. Good job. That's it. And so we want the army, going back to that thing I told you about where the goal of the game is to build a powerful army. We wanted champions and their star levels to matter. We wanted them to be important, right? Like how powerful your champion is should come a lot from the champion, not just the items. And so over time, we've had to keep lowering the items' values so that the champions matter more. The other thing is that you often hear a lot of people talk about best in slot, right? And imagine you're new to TFT, and the first thing you do is you high roll and you get an Ashe on 2-3, and you're like, sweet, I have an Ashe. And then you build a Deathblade on that Ashe, and everyone laughs at you and says, hey, idiot, you're not supposed to build a Deathblade on Ashe. You're dumb, you're bad, game's over, you lose because you didn't build the right thing. That's a really crappy experience. And so what we've wanted to do over time is make sure that the difference between best in slot and non-best in slot gets shrunk as well. So that if you don't have best in slot, it's not as big a deal. Now, that's not to say we've perfectly executed that, because there are definitely certain items that, like, Ashe kind of needs a Rage Blade, and without a Rage Blade, she suffers. Or blue buff, like we talked about before. So some items are still a little too, pivotal to a champion's success. But, like, going back to the Ashe example, a Deathblade versus an IE versus a Giant Slayer, is there really that big a difference? Not really. We've actually gotten that pretty good. There's a lot more leeway there on which of that items. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're playing at the highest level, someone will tell you, don't ever build IE, that's totally bad, it's always Deathblade, blah, blah. But, like, realistically, it's not that big a deal. And so that's been the other thing. So, TLDR, a combination of making sure that champs and their power level matter more than just the items, and making sure that the difference between best in slot and non-best in slot isn't so drastic. That's been our main goal. And hilariously enough, you mentioned we keep nerfing items. We still think items might be too strong. We still are like, are items still giving too much power? Maybe. Maybe. You know, is it really cool that your 2-star Hui with no items loses to a Kindred with just a blue buff? That's not great. So, I don't know. We'll figure it out. But that's why we've been going that direction, and I think that direction has been correct for TFT. All right, we're about halfway there. Hey Mort, I've mostly been wondering about cash out balance from augments and traits. My main example being the variety of rewards from the Golden Egg, 2 of them being very similar. These being the Tactician's Crown and 60 gold, and the Tactician's Crown plus 2 champ duplicators plus 4/5 cost plus 30 gold. I would like to understand whether it's a conscious decision to make some of the rewards better than others. So, ignoring that example for a second, let's talk about goals. The goal is that all of the cash outs in any particular thing, so like Golden Egg cash outs, a Fortune cash out at 10, whatever, should all be relatively close to balanced with each other. Now, there are going to be some times where it's subjective, right? Where like, let's use a really simple cash out. Do you want 8 gold or an item component? And immediately every challenger player right now is going, well, that depends. Is it 2-3 or is it 5-3? Because on 2-3, I'd rather have gold, and on 5-3, I'd rather have a component. What really matters is like, yeah, I get it. But those 2 cash outs are what we consider balanced, right? 8 gold versus a component. Those are balanced. Our goal is for them to be balanced. That is the goal. Now, do we perfectly execute on that? Nope. There are some times where it's really, really close. There are some times where it's subjective. You know, someone's mentioning Call to Chaos. I'm sure someone's going, the 5 emblem one is so far worse than the other ones. Sure, until it's not. But, you know. Cool. So our goal is to balance them. Now, the example you list is basically 60 gold versus 30 gold plus 4/5 cost, which is 50 gold plus 2 champion duplicators. Is that close? Is it close enough? No, you're probably right. It probably plus 10, like, in fact, let's do an exercise here, actually, chat. Hang on. Let's do an exercise. I'm gonna ask chat here. Okay, one cash out is 30 gold, 4/5 costs, and 2 duplicators. We've locked that in. That's the cash out, okay? The other cash out is X gold. How much gold does that have to be for these 2 to be balanced? Chat, go. I'm seeing 50, 60, 80, 75, 60, 100, 85, 80, 1,000, 9,001. 200 gold, not even close. So somewhere between the 60 it is and 100 is generally what it is. And this one's interesting. And you know why this is such a hard answer is because what is the value of a champion duplicator, right? What is the actual value of a champion duplicator? Well, obviously it's not just 5 gold, even if you use it on a 5 gold unit. That's incorrect. Is it 10 gold? Is it 12 gold? Raptor says 28 gold. I mean, so and again, what's funny is Raptor says 28 gold. So out of an orb on 4-1, do you want 28 gold or a duplicator? On 4-1, Raptor, which would you rather have? Okay, anyone saying duplicator is lying. You would definitely not rather have a duplicator over 28 gold. There is no way on 4-1. So, and this is what I mean. Like, this is why balance is such an interesting thing. Now, again, going back to the original example, do I think 60 gold is the answer? No, it's probably closer to 75 gold. It's probably closer to 75 gold because generally if you're getting a golden egg cash out, it's happening somewhere in the neighborhood of stage 5-1 to 5-6, give or take, and the value of gold goes down quite a bit in the late game. So, yeah. Now, someone in chat's asking the other good one is, generally curious, what about the set fortune cash out with 2 dummies? Every time I've gotten that, I feel really bad about that. Yep, same kind of thing. Again, the designer in charge of those tables was trying to be creative, and they're trying to be like, hey, I'm gonna have a really fun, cool cash out here where it's like set and he gets to lift up these things. And they tried to balance it around those same paradigms. But let's be real. I think set ended up being weak. The time it takes to build those up is too long. So yeah, it needs a buff. We already slapped on a Radiant Bloodthirster and it still needs more. So, but the original question was, is it intended for them to be different? No, the intention is that they're balanced. And so we just need to go through and buff them and give them some love. So yeah. It's completely subjective to your game state, so why not just keep it to just gold? Because then it's not fun, right? If every cash out is just, here's 100 gold, game's boring. Having interesting cash outs is unique and fun. So, yeah. Okay. Hey Mort, what are your thoughts on small visual changes, such as for Aphelios in future sets, where a unit gets a different weapon every game just for auto attacks, but without changing the ability? So, my initial reaction to that, as like, if let's say a designer came to me and was like, I'm going to make 3 cost Aphelios, and every game, which weapon he autos attack with is different. My response would be, for that visual difference, players are going to expect there to be a mechanical difference as well. If there's no mechanical difference, this will confuse players, and it would cost us a lot of art budget to make this, which is doing nothing for the game. Then my reaction would be, let's push this further. Should there be a difference in auto attacks? Then I would say, do I really want a 3 cost that has different auto attacks every game randomly at the start of the game? Probably not, because that difference in auto attacks isn't going to really change much. It would also change, like, so someone's like, we could have it be support AD/AP Aphelios. Now what you're dealing with is like, hey, this game I need to itemize Aphelios differently, and so you're asking people to memorize different itemizations. Like, okay, it's this Jace, so now I need to remember that it was Shojin, and oops, last game I built Shojin, but now this Aphelios is wrong. So overall, what I hear is a pitch that's like much too complicated for very low return, and I would probably shoot down a pitch like that. So, but there might be ways to make that work where it's like there's like 2 or 3 different versions. Generally, the better versions of this we've seen is like you get to pick which weapon you want, but having it be random per game, because also what ends up happening there is a lot of the times it gets optimized to, hey, this game only play it if it's this one, ignore the other 2. Someone in chat says, wasn't Rise like that? Yes, but Rise was also a spell, not an auto attack. There's a very big difference between I'm going to do a cool, unique spell randomly versus my auto attacks are different. Auto attacks don't really do much. So, yeah, this seems like the kind of thing that I'd be like, this is not where we want to spend our time and energy. Because again, we only have so much time and energy and art budget and engineering time and designer time. That's not where I'd want to spend it. Sometimes there's things that never hit live and probably never would due to bad gameplay design. You mean like someone who switches an auto attack every game? Just kidding. Unfun mechanics for opponents or just simply technical issues. What have been some of your favorite scrap designs that you know for sure aren't going to be in a future set? That aren't going to be in a future set. Okay, I'll talk about this one because I'm pretty sure we'll never ship this one. In set 3, the original set mechanic was Celestial and Darkstar were the 2 highlighted traits. And every stage would start, it was like a day-night cycle. So on 2-1, it would be day, and Celestial could appear in your shop, but Darkstar couldn't. And then on 2-2, it would be mid, so neither could appear. And on 2-3, it would be night, so Darkstar could appear in your shop. And then 2-5, mid, and the Celestial. And like, that's how it worked. And there was a day-night cycle, and that was the set mechanic in set 3. And it went about exactly as you'd expect, which is no one played Darkstar and Celestial because turns out when you can only get your trait 1 out of every 4 stages, it's not very good. And also every other state, like if you're playing Celestial or Darkstar, you only roll on those stages. And if you're not playing Celestial or Darkstar, it's better to not roll on those stages so that they don't show up and pollute your shop and you can get all the other stuff. TLDR, it was confusing and complicated and not great, so we shipped Galaxies instead. That's an example of like someone was trying to cooked a little too hard, we didn't ship it. So. Now, someone asked what was my favorite scrap design. That's not my favorite. I'm trying to tell you, I think I've told this one before, but one of my favorites we've heard done that we never shipped, and I don't know, we might ship this someday, but it's so old at this point, I'm just going to say it. Meddler had an idea for a Bard, and it was a Bard 5 cost, and the way it would work is he would open a portal, and in from the portal would come a unit from a past set. So... yeah, but I think I've told this story before, but that was a cool, fun idea that we just didn't ship for memory budget reasons. So, hey Mort, wanted to know, as a former Nintendo dev, with the release of the new Mario vs. Donkey Kong early this year, do you look at new games in the series that you were a part of in the past? And if so, is it more as just a fan or curiosity to see what they do with it? So this is an interesting question with a bunch of different layers, because that port in particular, the Mario vs. Donkey Kong port, was worked on by a lot of people who I used to work with, so I know like half the team that worked on it. Even more interesting, I think, is there are people who are still at NST who worked on the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong, who 20 years later worked on this Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Which to me is like wild. Like, I could not handle that. Like working on like, if somebody asked me to port a game I'd worked on 20 years ago, I couldn't do it. That's not me. Like, I got to make new things. I can't. No, thank you. But here's the thing. I've talked about it before. Like, for me, am I excited to go back and play a 20-year-old game that's been reworked and ported? No, not even a little. Like, I've already experienced those. Unless I really, really liked the game. Like, I'll be honest, I kind of want to play Paper Mario Thousand Year Door again. But I think the nice thing is, when you remake a game from 20 years ago, new people get to play it, right? There are people who were 19 years old right now who didn't get to play the first one, who get to play it. So I think it is a good thing after that much time. And I'm glad they do that. So, yeah, someone just said, what if you never played it? That's my point. Like, I think people who never got a chance to play it, great. That's why I'm glad this exists. I'm glad this project exists. Would I want to work on it? Hell no. But I'm glad it exists for people who want to play it. Now, where I don't agree is when you take something like, I don't know, The Last of Us, where it's like, didn't that game just come out 4 years ago and then you remake it? I'm not a fan of that, but 20 years I get. Like, that's cool. And so what I will say is, like, if the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series ever gets like a sequel, like a legitimate sequel, I will definitely play it, because I'll be very curious of like, what did they do? Did they use things that we had thought of that we couldn't use before? Did they go in a completely different direction? I'm very curious, so I'll definitely check it out. Remakes every year make money, money, money. Sure. I just, as a designer, do I want to work on remakes? Nope. Hey Mort, as players optimize their play and more mechanics are added, it feels like power level in the game has gotten quite high. You've made lots of small changes to balance this out, but I was wondering if you have any long-term plans to address this. Yep, we do. Some I can't talk about, but again, kind of like complexity ceiling, we are also at reward ceiling. It's funny, Milk always spams in lobby 2. He's like, down with inflation, down with inflation. And to some extent, he's actually right. It does depend on game to game. I think a standard game of TFT, and what I'll call a standard game is like, imagine you pick Golden Prelude, or not Golden Prelude, whatever the one where you get 3 gold augments as your portal. And you have a pretty, Golden Gala, thank you. You have Golden Gala, and then you have a typical 3 item, 6 gold start, and a pretty typical item distribution game. I think those games are actually like the correct spot, right? Like, those games are not inflated. Oh, and let's assume all the encounters were like pretty standard stuff, like working out with Set and Darius the bench, you know. No inflationary encounters either, right? Like, you look at that level of a game, and I'm like, that's a good game. Like, I don't think that's inflated at all. I think that's a standard, and I wouldn't nerf it. That's solid. But I do think a Scuttle Puddle into prismatic gold, into an encounter that gave you an artifact anvil, into another encounter that gave you 2 component anvils, into Tristana encounter, like, yeah, those games have hit the very high bar of the inflation output and probably need to come down. So basically, if you look at a graph of like, here's a normal game. Oh, wow, congrats on Golden Squink. If you look at, here's a normal game and here's like a silver bedge game, I think these are fine. I think the like extreme games we have right now do need to come down, but I wouldn't change where normal's at. I don't think that normal line needs to change. So, and someone's like, I like inflation. Yeah, so do I, and so do players. Let's be clear. Players like inflation. Yes, someone just said normal is boring. Yes, I get you. That's why I'm saying, like, don't bring this down to normal. That's not the goal. We get that y'all like Prismatic Party and Scuttle Puddle. So, like, the goal here is not get rid of this. It's just, it probably has to come down a little bit. Someone said it's definitely too common now. Yeah, it's a little too common now. But I certainly wouldn't want to get rid of those. So, yeah. This question, I'll do this question quick. Nobody wants to listen to me talk about myself. Could you tell us a little bit about the different milestones in your career? I'm gonna go fast because again, I don't want to bore you with like, I'm so great. Here's my 20-year career. Brr, 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 brr. No. I'll keep it quick. Getting hired at Nintendo. I guess getting to go to Digipen was the first one because that was like the video game school. Cool. Okay, see, now I'm going too far back. I'm going to focus forward. Stop. Okay. Getting the internship at Nintendo, big deal. There were like 7 people in finalists. I was one of the final 2. That was a big deal. Then from all the interns, getting to be the one to get to keep the job full time after Hammer got canceled. That was a big milestone. Then I think shipping Aura Climber, because that was like a game that like I came up with. So it was the first time like I came up with a game and we shipped it. That was a big deal. I'm really proud of that one. Then Crosswords Plus, because that was the first one I was a game lead on. And then Mini Mario Amiibo and Friends. That was like my 5 big like Nintendo milestones. Then coming to Riot. The switch to Blue Essence was my first really, really big project. The loot orbs and capsules made Riot lots of money. Odyssey showed I could do gameplay and players loved it. Into TFT, and then TFT has just been like win after win after win after win. So those are probably the big ones. That's the fast version. Again, I don't want to sit here and like brag about myself, but those are probably my big ones. So this one's a rephrase of a different question. But I do want to talk about a different part of this here. I was wondering, what is the reason that TFT has to stay on the league patch cycle once every 2 to 3 weeks? Would it not be better for the game to receive more constant patching and updating so it doesn't feel as stale sometimes? So again, we already talked about the client thing and the 2 weeks thing. I'm not going to dig into that. But someone just said, wouldn't it be better for the game to receive more constant patching and updating so it doesn't feel as stale sometimes? I think, here's the thing. We've talked about this before, but TFT already has burned out players who don't want a bunch of change, right? Like, imagine if TFT changed every 3 days. How the F would you keep up with that? How the F would you understand? Like, oh my God. That just, no way. But I'm ignoring the development side of it. I'm saying as a player, how would you keep up with that? Like, that's just too much. We were already talking about balance thrashing earlier. Knowing that the game changed every 3 days, my God, you'd never be able to keep up. Competitive players alone would TFT Academy. Nice. Every 2 weeks is already insanely fast, and then throw on a B patch. We already do it too much. The famous example I always use is like Brian Kibler would have liked TFT, but it changes just so damn much. He couldn't keep up with it. It felt like it was doing homework, and he quit. I think Hafu was similar for a while. Like, there are definitely players we've alienated because it changes so much. Now, that being said, do I think the answer is cater to those players and only change every 2 months? No. But I think 2 weeks feels like the right line. It's like, we change a lot and we fix things, but we don't change so much that, like, it's, you know, you can't keep up. So I don't know. 2 weeks still feels like the right answer to me. And every time this question comes up, I'm like, I wouldn't do it faster and I wouldn't do it slower. All right, we are on number 74. Hey Mort, it seems to me that high-level optimal play leans more towards rolling for units that you already have in mind that fit the items you have already made, which you made with the intent of rolling for those units. Is there any chance TFT could lean more towards building the best team you can amidst the chaos? I don't feel like there's enough chaos for it to feel like this time the same build will feel different to play. In the abstract, what you just described is the goal. I've said that before, right? It's like playing around the resources you've got. In the abstract, this is what we want. But when it comes to like optimization, like, you know, let's say you slam a Ginsu's early, and then later you hit 2 Kaisas. You can play those Kaisas, and it'll be stronger for a while. But the reality is, champions are designed differently. They have different outputs, and when you're playing at the absolute highest level, those differences are going to make a big thing. So some of that is already there. Now, hilariously enough, the inflation we talked about earlier has an impact on this as well. If you have a lot of inflation and a lot of gold, you will have plenty of gold to roll down and hit the things you're guaranteed. Like, if you need an Ash and you have 80 gold because it's Scuttle, Puddle, and Prismatics, great. Okay, someone in chat just asked a really dumb question. I'm trying not to be distracted by it. If you had like 80 gold and you rolled down at level 4, great. Shut up, Azir. You're probably going to hit the Ash. But if all of a sudden you only have 20 gold, you're probably not going to hit the Ash, and you're probably going to have to adapt with what you have. The challenge with that, though, is as you give players less resources, then they complain it's a lottery, right? If you only, like, let's say we drastically nerfed the amount of resources a player has, and then you hit level 8 with only 20 gold, well, then you go to level 7, you start rolling, and then it feels like a lottery. And so everyone complains it's a lottery. So we have to find the line between not enough resources that you can guarantee what you hit versus not so few resources that it's bullshit lottery. Now, all that being said, too, I think a really good example of how this worked, by the way, because you made this assessment that players always level with the intent for rolling for those units. Did you guys watch the Vegas Open? And if you did, one of the coolest things they added at the Vegas Open for the viewership that hasn't been around since was they would show you how much gold players had spent on rolling. Okay? And I remember this because this was actually a little illuminating for even me as a designer. Do you know how many times we would get to like, okay, it's endgame, it's level 9, Saint's got a really cool level 9 board. How many times did he press reroll? 0. The number of times you would see someone have like 0 rerolls level 9 was really high. So like, players are already doing what you're describing. They're already playing the units they hit and doing well. Someone in chat goes high roll. Yeah, sure. Everything's a high roll if you can play everything. So, but yeah. So I don't know. I think there's some of that there, but I'm not gonna say we're in the right spot that's perfect. But yeah. How is balance tested internally? A designer's experience and internal playtest PPE data definitely helps, but do you have methods of understanding how a balance change will affect the meta at scale? As a follow-up, how much of a role does machine learning have in TFT currently? Is it used as part of development for running simulations, analytics, etc.? So let me answer the second part first here. How much of a role does machine learning have in TFT currently? Not a damn thing. We do not use machine learning. Our game is too complicated for machine learning. The one time we tried was in set 3, and all it did was build Darkstar Lux over and over and over and over and over and over and over after like 2 months of work. So, yeah, our game's pretty complicated. That was the broken build then? Yeah, clearly. Our game is too complicated for AI. It really is, at least for now. So, at least for now, the combinatorics are just so astronomically high that it is too complicated. Well, chess is AI. Yeah, we're way more complicated than chess. Sorry. So, now, that being said, how is balance tested internally? I mean, you mentioned it, a designer's experience, internal playtest, PBE data. And do you have a understanding of how it will affect the meta at scale? It comes with experience. Oh, hey, Medios. Appreciate the 23 months. Happy birthday, by the way, Medios. And in fact, I'll share an anecdote with you here, by the way. Aniko's still relatively new to the team, and he helps with finalization and prepping the new sets. And he will rant to me because it's like, he'll do these sims, he'll think he gets the balance in a really good spot, and then he'll play the game in a playtest, and it doesn't quite match up. And he's like, these sims do not actually match the state. It's really tough. And recently he came to me and he was like, man, I can't believe you and Kent used to do this with like just this and a box of rocks in a cave. And it's like, yeah, it's pretty tough. So that was a little gratifying, but yeah, that's the thing. A lot of the times people think that there's like some magic tool that helps you balance better or magic data. There really isn't. And it's always funny because I love Dish Soap and Froden, but there's always this moment that sticks out in my head where they were like, is blue buff good on this champion? And their immediate reaction was, I don't know, the stats say it's okay. I think it was blue buff Twitch at the time. It's like, is blue buff Twitch good? I don't know, the stats say it's okay. And I'm like, imagine if you were like working on the set, like you're a Nico working on set 12 and you're like, is blue buff good on Twitch? I don't know, let me go check the stat. Oh, wait. We don't have those, you know? So it's very easy to be like, oh, the game went live. Look at these stats. There's all the answers. We don't have those in development, you know? So we got to do the best with what we got. So, yeah. And who knows? Maybe someday there will be a magic tool, but first 5 years, there hasn't been. Stats are also biased. True. Oh, there was a really great thing. Aniko sent me a clip of Dish Soap, and it said, nature is healing. And the clip is of Dish Soap saying, I don't know, man, stats just lie. I'm more of a feel player now. It's like, yes, nature's healing. Oh, it was good. So, yeah. Nature heals everything. That's my name, LOL. That's great. That's great. How often do you dream of TFT? A decent amount. Hey, Mort, we've repeatedly heard from yourself and the TFT team that all metrics indicate TFT is the best it's ever been. We didn't say that. We said TFT is doing great. It's definitely not the best it's ever been. We're a 5-year-old game. Time eventually makes this happen. But TFT's still in a great spot. If you didn't see it recently, and I can say this because it's in an article now, and I'm allowed to quote an article that is publicly facing, but in this article, it said TFT has 33 million monthly active users. So, seems pretty good for a 5-year-old game, I'm just saying. But, could you go into detail on what metrics you use to measure this? So, active players and revenue are the big two, like, major KPIs that we use to determine. Player sentiment is another one. Right? This is like, we do general surveys, and it's like, hey, are players having fun? Are they happy? Right? Like, trust in devs. As an interesting one, I can share with you that, like, actually, I shouldn't share that. But yeah, anyway, we use a lot of these sentiments to figure out, you know, if our metrics are good. And anytime those metrics are off, it's like, cool, we might need to change. So, yeah. Like I said, our insights team really helps us a lot with that. But again, the highest level ones are, player numbers, player hours, player engagement, stuff like that. And then general revenue, because generally if people are playing your game, sometimes they buy things, and yeah, so. Ooh, this is a good one. I wanted to ask about the reasoning behind the 1 HP last stand shield and double up. It feels like a lot of games come down to 3 or 4 teams on 1 HP, and last turn matchmaking decides the outcomes. I like this question a lot because, I'll be honest with you, I also am not a fan of the 1 HP last stand that happens in double up, especially with the whole 2 HP rounding thing. But I can tell you, because I did talk to the person who did this initially, and the general idea is what was happening is, in a lot of the times in early player labs in double up, what was happening is people were playing the game, everything's going fine, they're winning their fights, and then all of a sudden they die, and they're like, wait, what? Huh? Why am I dead? Oh, our team lost all their health. Oh, I didn't even realize. I just won my fight, and I lost that. What just happened? And it was very jarring for people to, lose the game when they had just won a fight. And so the last stand thing was sort of a, warning, if you or your buddy lose, it's about time to die. And it was there to help clarity of that experience. Now, that being said, like I said, to me, I'm not a fan of it because okay, I'm at 3 HP. Well, next fight we can lose, who cares? You can do some weird things with it that I'm not a huge fan of. But yeah, that was the original reasoning. And then the other thing I'll say here is, you mentioned last turn matchmaking decides the outcomes. I really hate that perspective because what do you mean last turn matchmaking? You lost because your army lost. You lost because you had less health. Matchmaking is just one thing of a long line of things. And so if you fight somebody who's stronger than you, you lose. That's not matchmaking diff. That's, you should have built a better army. So I don't know. I've never liked the matchmaking diff thing, but does the team intentionally design a set to cater to lower elo or higher elo players more? We already talked about this. That's just we make the set to be fun. That's all we care about. It's not one or the other. How did you start as a game dev? What were your first projects about? And most importantly, how do you set goals to avoid scope creep? I feel like every time I get into making a game, I start thinking of more and more things I want to add, and it becomes unmanageable. Okay, so I'm going to avoid the how did I start as a game dev? You guys already heard the Digipen, Nintendo, blah, 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 blah. Stop talking about yourself, Mort. Instead, I want to talk about, you talk about, how do you get started in making a game? How do you avoid scope creep? This is a hard one, right? Because the number of times you meet somebody who's like, okay, I want to be a game creator. Okay, cool. What are you going to make? Well, I'm going to make an MMO. Stop it. The number of people who think they're going to make this giant RPG, or because that's their favorite type of game, right? And everyone wants to make the games they love, so they want to make that. The thing you have to start with if you really want to get into game creation is the first thing you should try to make is something very, very simple, and then add to it. One of my first Digipen projects that I'm really, really proud of, it was called Brick Wars. And all Brick Wars was, if you guys have played Pong, right? You know how Pong works. And you know how Breakout works, right? So imagine Pong, but behind the Pong, you have a row, 4 rows of bricks, okay? That's a game. Cool. And then what we added to it was we kept putting video game themes on it. So in the Samus level, your paddles are Samus, and you could shoot missiles at each other, and you could block the missiles, and if the missiles hit the ball, they would push the ball, and if they hit the bricks, they would break the bricks. And we had a Samus level. And then we had a Link level where it was just, instead of the ball being a ball, it was a chicken, and every time you hit the chicken, another chicken would come, and there'd be more chickens. And it's you just start with a very simple concept, and then you add to it. And that can show you some systems design and things like that. So it's pretty fun. But that will help you keep things in scope. And then eventually over time, as you get really, really good at it, then you can start going, okay, now it's time to make the bigger projects, because you'll understand what it takes to make the smaller projects. So Someone just asked, what's your day 30 retention? So the funny thing is, that is a number that someone on my team knows and cares about. Not me. I could not tell you what that number is, but like my boss and my boss's boss care very much about that number. So I understand that every set will have a different theme, style, and trait. Would there be a day that the team will finally put a permanent set of this? No. I think the only day we get to a permanent set is when we retire. Like, hypothetically, let's say 20 years down the road, and this is so stupid, I'm just going to say it anyway, though, but like 20 years down the road, Riot is closing down and they've sold the game to EA, and EA wants to keep it barely open, so they say hurry up and make set 50 as a permanent set and keep it on. Okay, there you go, there's your permanent set. But like, other than that ain't happening, right? Like, permanent sets get old really quick. We actually tried this in Fight for the Golden Spatula. They have a set 1 reprint we call set X. And when it first came out, people played it because it was new and interesting. And about 4 months later, no one's playing it. It's boring. It's not new. It's not interesting. So, will there ever be a permanent set? No, probably not. I like how this is just like number 81 in the spreadsheet. How are you? Generally good. Nervous about the thing I'm about to talk about in an hour, but generally good. Excited for the thing I'm about to talk about in an hour. A lot of my focus is on the thing I'm about to talk about in an hour. So, yeah. But generally good. Generally happy. I'm also getting a few random work Slack messages I have to check later, so gotta deal with that. I have 2 interviews this afternoon. This is people interviewing for the TFT team. So, yeah. Witty, okay, literally Witty. Random work Slack message. Hi, Witty. Nice. All right. How do you and the team go about creating new ideas, character models, set ideas, mechanics, etc.? Are there set times when you discuss new ideas, or do they just occasionally pop up? And are there places where inspiration is drawn from repeatedly, like the other Riot games, or is there a broader array of things you draw inspiration from? So to sound like a TFT player, the answer is it depends. Sometimes you are assigned a project. So for example, we go, hey Liv, go work on set whatever, 15. And now it's a time to start thinking about new ideas and new character mechanics. That's a specific time you've been assigned to, like, you need to come up with some new ideas. Other times it might be like, hey, Alex sees me in the office and he's like, yo, I was in the shower and I just had this thought. What if we did this? And you're like, yeah, that's a cool idea. And then Alex, because he's the gameplay product lead, he can go, cool, I'm going to put that on the product roadmap and we're going to ship that here. Cool, because that can just spawn. Or a random designer comes up to Alex and is like, yo, I just had this idea. What do you think of this? Right? Like, another common one is like 5 designers go to lunch and they sit together and they're just talking about a game they were playing. And they're like, oh, that game has this cool thing. Wouldn't it be cool if we did something like that in TFT? That'd be neat. So that's one of the benefits, by the way, of having the on-campus thing is like people talk to each other, and as you talk, inspiration happens. 5 TFT designers enter a bar. Nice. But yeah, so they just occasionally pop up. I will say one of the things I'm most excited about in the future in like Redacted B was just like me thinking about a problem on a weekend one day. So, yeah, it just pops up. So, and everyone's got their different things they pull inspiration from. To pick on Witty, since he's sending me random work Slack message, he plays a lot of like builder games, and so a lot of his inspiration can come from stuff like that, or he watches a lot of streams, and so stuff can come from that. So, yeah. I'm holding out for Redacted C. Perfect. How do you feel about different playstyles having varying win rates depending on the skill of the player piloting? How okay would it be for you to have a hard-to-pilot comp average a 4.8 below gold, increasing to a 4.2 in Challenger? So the answer is we feel pretty good about that, and that's already true, right? Like, Fortune is literally the example of this, where it's like, again, in Setsuko's hand, probably like a 3.5. Anyone else's hand, probably sitting at like a 6, you know? But I will go back to something I've said all the way since day one, and, you know, it's a controversial opinion, but it's still the opinion, is that we balance TFT as if computers were playing it. That is how TFT is balanced. It is balanced as if there were these hyper-optimized computers playing against each other. That's how it works. And so, what that can lead to, the best example of this going wrong is Remix Rumble Punk. Remix Rumble Punk was awful in high elo. Like, to be honest, it probably needed a couple buffs. But man, if you were plat or lower, Punk was in every lobby, dominating every single lobby, and you were probably like, I hate Punk, I hate Riot for making Punk, y'all are crazy. But again, we've stuck with, oh cool, YouTube crashed. Neat. YouTube crashed again. Cool. Describe what you were doing when the crash tab crashed. Cool. Okay. Well, let's find a different song. Anyway. Yeah, so like I said, generally we balance around, things like that. The other thing is that we talk about, I have YouTube Premium. That's not the problem. We talk about how, like, different comps are going to have different win conditions, right? Like, just because a comp has a 4.8 average does not mean it's bad. And we've seen plenty of times where players who know how to pilot comps that have a lower win rate end up doing really well. My favorite personal example of this is at Worlds, when we had the Lucian with the Hextech augment, and I can never remember the name of the augment, but he played the Lucian game, and Stored Power, thank you, Azir. The Lucian Stored Power game, right? Like, Stored Power had like a 4.8 or 4.9, something bad. Lucian was not considered a really strong champion, and yet he ended up winning Worlds with that. So, yeah. So, TLDR, good stuff. How does the TFT team gauge player satisfaction with a current set? Do you have data on how each set compares against each other on this metric? We've talked about it a few times so far in this, but our insights team does a lot of really good work in this stuff. And the nice thing is they make sure to compare at a similar time, right? So, like, they don't interview people right now and be like, how did you like set 6, 7, and 8? What they do is, like, 3 weeks into set 6, they're like, how did you like set 6? Here's a number. 3 weeks into set 7, how did you like set 7? Here's a number. And they get comparables at different time metrics with each other. And so that's how we can do that. And that's why, for example, like, one of the hot topics I said recently was like that encounters performed really, really well on our metrics. Because again, compared to every other mechanic, like 3 weeks into a set, encounters were favorable. They were having really high numbers. So, but that's generally how we gauge it, is a lot of those like player surveys, player satisfaction, stuff like that. Who is your favorite GAP member to outplace in playtests, and why is it a Nico? No, you have to be careful there, Aphic, because sometimes in playtests we have a few people that like will play to win instead of playing to test, and you have to be careful because you don't want to encourage them to play to win. So that's a tough one. How hard is it to switch between different projects and try to coordinate all of them effectively? For example, do you tend to mix up different ideas and something goes wrong, or do you think that some projects suffer because you did not spend more time on them? So this is a tricky one. I said it again, by the way. Take a drink every time Mort says this is a tricky one. So it is very difficult to coordinate a lot of projects. You guys saw me earlier, like, what was that time where I'm like, is Bard in this set? I don't know. Like, when you're working on a lot of different sets, you mix them up and stuff like that. The other part of this question is you asked, like, do you think some projects suffer because you did not spend more time on them? Yes and no. I definitely want to help as many projects as I can, as much as I can. But part of my job is to like train people up so that I'm not needed as much, right? The goal, it's one of those weird things about corporate world, but like the goal is you are training people so you are not needed. You are trying to pass on your knowledge and your skills so you're not needed and can do something else. So like, are there sets that struggled because I didn't pay as much attention to them? Yeah. But like, again, the goal is for them to not need me. And so you have to keep working on that. So now as far as how you coordinate them all effectively, it requires some very, very good organization. So you just have to be able to contextualize everything. And sometimes it takes me a bit. So like, for example, I'll have a conversation with like the set 13 team and they're like, oh, what do you think of this? And you're like, okay, wait, remind me. Okay, that's that. And okay, cool. Now I can tell you about my feedback on this thing in set 13. Like you have to recontextualize and rethink about it. So yeah. Okay, tell you what, how about I do this? So this is the next question. And I think I'm going to troll a little bit. And I think this is perfect. Someone said, how long do you expect to continue working on TFT? Just curious about where you see the future going. Shall we talk about the announcement? Let's just do the announcement now. Let's get this out of the way. I'm going to put it on my screen here. I'm going to full screen it. I'm going to go like this. Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, and I'm on a different camera because I have a bit of a personal announcement to talk about. As you can see with this camera, my office is looking a little empty. Not much going on in here. That's because I'm going to be moving. I have been at Riot for almost 8 years now. It's been an awesome 8 years and things have been good. But for my family and I, coming to California was pretty rough. Had a lot of friends and family back in Washington. And that's where, I worked at Nintendo. Thankfully we had some family down here that made it, acceptable, but we're just really not California people. Traffic is just more than we can handle. It's just not the kind of place we want to be. We like it more where there's weather and green and stuff like that. And then the other thing is that with my son and his autism, I want to make sure he's got a support network if anything were to happen to me and my wife as he gets older. So what we're doing is we saved our money and we're pretty good about it. And about 1.5 years ago, or 2 years ago almost at this point, we made the decision and we bought a piece of land in a small town in Washington. It's like a 6-acre plot of land, and we have been building the house, our dream house. When I say small town, I mean like population less than 10,000 small. It's a very small town and it's almost done. The house is done. And so we're going to be moving in July. It's going to be great. We're excited to kind of get back, to that area. It's surrounded by trees. It's quiet. We're looking forward to it. So it's going to be nice. Obviously the question becomes, what does that mean for me and TFT? Well, the good news is not much actually. Riot has been really awesome throughout this entire process. When I first brought it up to them, they were like, yeah, makes sense. We totally understand your reasoning. And, with Riot doing its hybrid model and me being willing to fly down multiple times a year and stuff like that so that my family can be up there. In the long term, not much will change. I will still be the gameplay director of TFT. I'll still be working from home most of the time, which is kind of true now. Like I said, I'll fly down a few times a year. For example, the first time I have to fly down is like late August. But what it does mean in the short term is that for the month of July, I will not really be around. I may have a few random days here and there to do silly streams and stuff, but we're actually moving in July. So my wife and kids are heading up like July 2nd, moving all the stuff like July 5th. Basically, you have to consider me not here for the month of July. And so that means like no tweets, no patch rundowns, things like that. And the big thing here is that does mean for our next set launch, I will not be around. So you won't get, patch 13.13 and 13.14 rundowns, no PvE rundowns, stuff like that. That won't be from me this time. The good news is you've got a lot of people on the team who are going to be able to take care of things while I'm out. should be totally fine. You've got Keaton on the live side. You've got Kent and his team on the finalization side. Alex making sure things all run together. So hopefully, if all goes well, you'll barely even notice I'm gone. And so I'll come back August 1st. It'll be great, and we'll kick right back to it, except I'll have a different background because I'll be in a different place. TLDR here is Mort's gone for the month of July because he's moving, and then he'll be back August. Otherwise, enjoy the next set launch. It's going to be great. You'll still have me for a few weeks because this video is going out the 14th or something. To everyone who's watching, thank you for watching and supporting me this whole time. To everyone on my team, thank you for helping build TFT. To Riot, thank you for letting me do this so that me and my family can be in a better place. That's going to do it for me. Take it easy. So yeah, there you go. Little debated. We wanted to have some fun with that. But yeah, I won't be here July, but we are moving, and it's gonna be great. And so to go back to this question, because it was the perfect transition. How long do you expect to continue working on TFT? Just curious about where you see the future going. My goal is at least another 5 years. I want to hit 10 years on TFT. I want to see if I can go 10 years on TFT, and then we'll see. But I think 10 years on TFT will be pretty cool. So that's why, like I said, a lot of the redacted stuff I'm working on is like could be a year, could be 2 years out. I'm still around for a while, so I don't know. TFT is such a fun game to work on, and the fact that like every 4 months you get to kind of reinvent it, it's gonna be fun. So yeah. So there you go. Let's keep going. I've got another hour. I want to keep answering questions, but there you go. There's the real life thing I've been working on for so long. So like behind the scenes, I've been like trying to make decisions around this house and figuring things out, and you know, a lot of work there. So I assume the team's process for making a set is choosing a theme, finding origins that fit the theme, units, classes, refining trait structure, other things. How often does the practicality of one element suffer from the necessity to fit the previous ones? So generally in this process, the big thing that causes a challenge here is like pick a theme, pretty easy. You can pick a theme. Finding origins that fit the theme, cool. That's not too bad. That's pretty easy. Washington State, by the way. Units and classes. This is where it starts to get hard, right? So like, let's say you pick up, KDA is actually a really good example of this, right? Let's say we're like, hey, we're going to make a KDA trait. Cool. You look at the champions you have for KDA and you're like, who's the tank? Who are our choices? Right? And it's like, okay, I don't know. Let's make Kaisa the tank somehow. And then you're like, oh, but I need Kaisa for this other trait over here. And you do a lot of back and forth. And so some of that can really mess up with the choices. So yeah, that ends up being the biggest blocker there. So. I feel like encounters being shown at the start of the game would offer more skill expressions, such as more complex planning for upcoming events. Would disclosing them at the start take away too much from the aspect of surprise? So, this is an interesting one, but I actually disagree with this. Like, I see where you're coming from on this one, but I actually disagree with this. I think it actually makes the skill expression less. And let's take an example here of the carousel. Let's say 2-4, you know there is a carousel encounter, and you know it is the one that's going to have an artifact, okay? If that's true, there's now one correct play, right? The correct play is to try to lost streak to get the first choice, right? But the skill expression has actually gone down pretty significantly. But if you know that there's a encounter, but you don't know which one it is, the skill expression is sort of weighing, okay, what are the possibilities of what it could be? And do I value those possibilities to weigh against the options of what I've got, right? It becomes a bit more vague of a choice. And that vagueness of the choice is the skill expression. And so, again, I think if you knew exactly what encounters were happening, there is a specific solve that you always do. If you know a recombobulator encounter is happening on 2-3, guess what? You always level to 5 and deep roll, or roll to try to 2-star a 3. Like, there's now just a solved answer. So I don't think that that is a good thing. So, but I get why it's appealing, right? Like, knowing what you can do and having a plan for it feels like something that you'd want to do. I feel like this set has really nailed giving certain champions a lot of juice. Is that something you intentionally designed towards or a byproduct of other design elements? This is a hard question, because what do we mean by juice? I don't remember the meeting where Giovanni was like, well, I added 28% orange juice and 30% grape juice. Did I miss that meeting? Anyway. I'm not sure what you mean by juice. Generally, I mean, this is going to sound abstract, but like, generally our goal is to make champions feel impactful and like have a lot of emphasis behind them. If that's what you mean. Strong identities and power fantasy? Okay, so let's assume that's what they mean. If they mean strong identities and power fantasy, that is just a goal of TFT and something we're trying to just get better at. Every single champion goes under that lens where it's like, what's their item fantasy? What's their core fantasy? And so that's just something I've been pushing the team to get better at, and a lot of the team has. I know Linda and Noemi and Sloan on this pod were really good about that, so there's that. But yeah. So it's just something we need to keep being better at. I want, like I talked about earlier, every single champion needs to have that fantasy. So, ooh, here's a good one. We haven't talked about this at all. This feels like we've mostly avoided this. Oh wait, I'm supposed to mostly ignore this question, I think. Never mind. We've gotten too far. Where was I? Uh-oh, I lost my spot. Okay. How did you discover your dream job, and how long did it take to obtain said job? I'm honestly really scared of the future. It is an exciting yet dreadful period of time for self-discovery and change. So this one's I almost said it again. I almost said this is a tricky one. I've known I wanted to be a game designer for my whole life, basically, since kindergarten when I got my NES from my mom and grandma. I got lucky enough to be able to pursue it. You know, my backup was always math teacher. That was my backup job. But I know not everyone is like this, and so it's kind of hard to say that. And I'll say the other thing, by the way, is that don't mistake your passion for something as it should be your job. Because if you take your passion and turn it into a job, you will stop being passionate about it eventually. I do not enjoy video games as much as I used to. Now, the good news is I still enjoy them, but certainly not as much as I used to. And so be careful to not turn your hobby into a job. But the thing I'll say that's important is find a job that you can make a living off of and you can find some satisfaction of. And that should be your goal. A lot of people will look at it as the job is there to support, living everything else, which is true. So it's pretty hard to get lucky enough that you can get a job that you can throw yourself into. So, and again, a lot of these are generic platitudes, and it's really different for everybody. I work in a large company globally, and I've seen many individuals arguing about how data should be interpreted. How do you personally feel about this? And how does your team tackle these issues? This is a very good question, because this is like, I don't think anyone has solved this problem. I mean, we see players misinterpret the data they see on websites. We internally misinterpret data. I mean, the number of times I've had to sit through a presentation where somebody at Riot is presenting something and they're like, our 68% dropped to a 62%. This is a big deal and we must react to it. And you're like, bro, chill, dude. And it's funny because how does your team tackle it? Well, our team generally kind of like follows the data and uses their instincts. I'm a little different here because it's funny because I'm such a logical person and I'm such a numbers person but I have an inherent bias to not trust any data. And so a lot of the times, like, I have really good conversations with our lead of insights because, again, my natural reaction is like, that 68 to 62 doesn't mean what you think it means. It's fine. I talk to players. Here's what they're actually thinking. It's fine. And my insights people are like, shut up. Actually listen to our data. You know, and so we kind of go back and forth. But that's the thing I think is important is it's like, take the data. The term they always use is data informed. And you use that data to match with like the real life experience. And it's one of the things why I like playing on stream and I like talking to players and getting in the game is like, I get a good bucket of what the experience is of the game merged with the data and then use that to make good decisions. So, and generally that's kind of everyone's approach, but there's lies, there's damned lies, and then there's statistics. Yeah, exactly. Man, the number of things you see on like news sites where they're like, here's a graph, and then you see that the graph, like y-axis is completely wrong, et cetera, et cetera. It just like, yeah, stats get so misleading. I've been really enjoying massive simulation games like Stellaris and Hearts of Iron 4. Have you played games like these before? I'm curious about your perspective on them as a game designer. I haven't actually played much of these. This is one of those genres I'm pretty weak to, but I know we have some people on the team that play a lot of them. It's just something I never really got into. I was much more of a console gamer, and so there weren't really a lot of good choices on console for this. So it's one of those things I should probably play more. Okay, we finally got here's a spicy question. Mort often redirects questions about bag sizes to the broader question of, should TFT even be a draft game? TFT seems to be a much more interesting interactive game as a draft game. Assuming TFT will remain a draft game, is there some sort of happy medium that could be explored related to bag sizes? So, I want to break this down to a player experience and describe a player experience, okay? Let's say you start a brand new game of TFT, and the first thing you get is a Rek'Sai. Cool. You kill the first PvE mob, and it drops an armor, and 2 Kindreds, and a Zyra. Cool. Your next shop is Rek'Sai, Garen, Rek'Sai, Kobuko. Okay, cool. Four Rek'Sais, and I've got some stuff going on. I'm gonna play what I hit. I'm gonna buy these Rek'Sais. Cool. Things are looking good. Next shop, you get 2 more Rek'Sais and some other stuff and another Kindred. So you've got 6 Rek'Sais and a Kindred 2. Life's great. And you got all that, and your augment appears, and you get a Dryad emblem, and there's a Gnar in a shop and 1 more Rek'Sai. Okay? So now you're at 7 Rek'Sais, and you've got 4 Dryad. You're a high roller. Life is good. Life is good. And you're playing what you hit. You're high rolling. Things are good. And then you look around. Okay? And 2 other players chose Mulched. 1 other player chose Bruiser Emblem and has 6 Rek'Sais and a Kobuko 2. And your heart just goes like this. You're just sad now. You look around and you're sad. The question is, what do we want the player experience to be in this situation? Right? What is the player supposed to do? You look around and you're like, am I supposed to just not play Dryad? Is that the plan? Is that what I'm supposed to? This is why I always like, I'm like, is TFT supposed to be a draft game? Currently, the answer is like, well, you shouldn't have played something contested. But you didn't? You played what you hit? Right? So it's kind of weird. And I think that's the experience right now that is frustrating a lot of our players. And I think the kind of thing that we need to try to make a better experience. Someone said, me Dryad, no pivot / mute. I mean, hilariously enough, from a purely tactical standpoint, that is the correct play. That is 100% the tactical correct play, which is also not great. So we need to find a way to solve that problem and figure out what that is. And is the answer just increase the bag size to 51 cost so that everyone can play Dryad? Maybe. Is the answer something else? Maybe. But either way, that's a problem that I think we need to solve, and it's why I keep talking about the should TFT be a draft game, because it's a question of like, should that be an experience that players have? So can that be solved by expanding traits so there's more comps? I mean, you can't give everything 3 traits, then the game becomes too complicated. And even in that example, right, like the biggest person contesting you weren't even the Dryad players, because at least with Dryad, it's like, well, I could play Kindred, I could play Gnar, I could play 3-star Rek'Sai, then Fast 9, but you had the Bruiser player taking your Rek'Sais too, you know, so yeah. Washington, D.C. or Washington State? Washington State. It's where I'm from originally. If a different game studio developed TFT, what would be the biggest challenge they'd face in terms of game development? Content creation. One of our big secrets and why we can do so well is, hey, we want to make a new set. Well, you've got 1,700 league skins to choose from with 158 champions who already have all their animations done, all their skills done. Use those, right? Like, it's like building, you know, you already have like all the Legos. Build the pieces. And then you're a new game studio and you don't have these Legos anymore. How do you build, right? Like, as a dumb example, let's pretend for a minute I don't know, I can't think of a better example, so I'm just gonna say I'm Blizzard and I want to make a TFT clone, right? How many models do you have lying around? And yes, I know they have Heroes of the Storm, so maybe not the best example, but that lack of models and lack of animations and stuff like that, that's the thing that's actually going to cost a lot. So yeah, that's the biggest thing. People keep saying Pokemon, and we talk about Pokemon as an auto battler, but like, you need all those Pokemon stuff like that, you know, you need all the models and stuff like that. So if something isn't working in a meta, have you ever considered reworking the champ trait line radically instead of just a little stat buff nerf? What are the pros and cons of this? I mean, we've done that before, right? I think an example of this is like Kale last set. Kale last set, we just like couldn't get her to work, and then finally reworked her. Now, it depends on your definition of radically, right? Because like, would we ever replace Kale with a completely different champion? Probably not. We don't have time to make those animations and stuff like that. Different spell, that would require art to come back, which means we're not working on future sets, which is rough. But we've definitely done reworks as necessary. So, yeah. The pros and cons are like, that much change is, again, we talk about the change aversion, right? People needing to adapt. Ooh, someone said Oxforce. Yes. Oxforce was a good example. But it's like, was Oxforce really a radically big rework? Or was it like a small rework that solved a big problem, you know? And again, that's where clever design comes in. You have to design within the constraints to figure that out. So, yeah. All right. We're only 3 hours in. Normally I go about 4 hours in this, but I'll be honest with you, I had to get up early to do a China show match, so I'm kind of feeling pretty tired, and I have the interviews coming up that I need to prepare for, so I might end it here. We might end at the 3 hour line here. I don't want to keep going on fumes. This is what I keep telling you guys about, like, know your limits. I'm starting to feel my limit here, so that way I can get some food and get ready for the interviews and stuff like that. So if you want some fun, check the salt tab. Salt tab. What salt tab? What's a salt tab? Now I'm curious what this is. On the sheet. Oh. Okay, salt tab. Hang on. Is there... Okay. Oh, I didn't even see we had a salt tab. Hang on. Don't go anywhere. There's a salt tab. All right, I'll end with... Okay, Azir, pick 3 numbers on the salt tab, and I'll read the salt ones. You name the numbers, I'll read them. This is gonna be good. 12? Okay, number 12. Here we go. We got 3 spicy questions, and then we'll end it. You want spicy, hard-hitting questions? So What makes you believe your team is doing really well when they are having to redo every single deliverable aside from monetization? Like any small-brained chimp can prey on the short-sightedness and addictive qualities of predatory monetization. What do you believe you'll be remembered for if not fueling aggressive microtransactions that prey on the uneducated and gambling-addicted masses? Woo! Okay, well, so what do I believe your team is doing really well? We're a 5-year-old game with 33 million players, which is a good thing, and people are having fun. When you have to redo every single deliverable, do we? I don't recall redoing every single deliverable. I recall making adjustments, but I don't recall redoing any. I think your definition of redo is a little too strict here. If we have to buff something, are we redoing the deliverable? No. Prey on the short-sightedness and addictive qualities of predatory monetization. We've had this debate before. I'm not having it again, but are baseball cards, predatory? If so, sure. I don't think they are. I think baseball cards are fun. So, randomness is not inherently predatory. There are versions of it that are predatory. I don't believe there are. We have different opinions. So, yeah. All right, what's next, Azir? Give me 2 more. 15? Why do the TFT passes lose value every set? Why do we get worse and worse sets despite having a balanced team for them? I mean, I don't think we get worse sets every time. In fact, I think it's interesting if you ask different people which sets are good and bad. If anything, it probably looks like this. Because some people will say set 9 is the best set. Some people say set 10 is the best set. Most tier lists do not look like a reverse order. So I don't think that's true. As far as why do TFT passes lose value every set, I think it really depends. Like, I dug into this a bit when I was on Reddit, and it really depends on what you value, right? Like, some people value legendary eggs, and they're like, the passes have gotten worse. But some people get, like, chibis out of them, and they feel better. Some people valued the maps that they would get out of them. So other people value just getting a bunch of little legends and higher quality the river sprites. So I don't know that they've lost value every set. I think the thing I always go back to is look at everything you get. It's $10. If it's not worth $10, don't buy it, And so, I don't know. I keep looking at the pass every time, and it's like, it still seems worth $10. So, Chimeric says, set 2 was TFT was peak, all downhill from there. Oh, God. All right, one more salt question. What's a good salt question? 10? Oh, no. 10's a rough one. When will you be able to finally balance the game properly? Imbalance every patch must exist, so there's a new meta forming, and people that have more than one brain cell and do not need to copy cops from one of the 1,000 meta apps can make good progress for a day. But seriously, the imbalance is just too big. There should never be a thing as D or even C tier combs. But a bit more effort into balancing. It's fine to lose against an S tier comb with a weaker comp, but only to a certain degree. If a B tier comb board is worth 30 plus more gold in total because there are 2 to 3 players per lobby that just spam the highest S tier they found from one of them mentioned websites, you should just beat them. Okay. So to approach this fairly, this is one of the things I was talking about is that we only have, we have 58 champions and so many combinatorics of comps. And what's funny is, like, let's use my Horizon Focus Rek'Sai as an example. 3 or 4 weeks ago, nobody knew about Horizon Focus Rek'Sai. It's a neat thing. Fast forward, I saw recently someone was like, new comp discovered, Horizon Focus Rek'Sai. Eventually, Horizon Focus Rek'Sai ends up on a site, and eventually it becomes meta. Did anything change? No. Is the balance bad? No. But people like to go, meta, I'm losing, point to it. This is like all the way back to the Street Fighter days where it's like, you're just spamming Hadoukens. You're cheap and bad, right? Like, attacking people's strategies to win makes you feel better about losing. That's just been a common thing people do to make themselves feel better. And so yelling and going, yeah, you just played S tier comp, or what's the one that always happens on our stream where it's like, you pick a champion and immediately someone's like, oh, you're a Lee Sin abuser. You mean I'm playing Lee Sin? No, you're a Lee Sin abuser. And that makes me feel better about losing to Lee Sin because I called you an abuser. So, the real talk is if you want to get good at a game, play everything, stop whining, get good, noob. And it's not a balance issue, it's you need to be less insecure. So, so there you go. I will be back tomorrow, normal stream, playing TFT, stuff like that. Hope you enjoyed this. We've got 2 more weeks till I move, and then July I'll miss you all, but 2 more weeks of streams. Should be fun. I've got work to do. Until next time, love you all. Take it easy.